Good morning. I'm Ashley Walsh, president and founder of Pocono Organics, and it's my honor to welcome you to the Food Forever Experience Pocono, hosted here at Pocono Organics and brought to you virtually by our friends at Patagonia Provisions. We are proud to partner with the Crop Trust and Rodale Institute to broadcast this historic Food Forever experience to all of you throughout the world. Today is United Nations Global Day of Action. You will hear a lot about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Target 2.5, which is addressing world hunger and crop diversity to safeguard biodiversity. We have an amazing program designed for you that is full of inspiring speakers who will not only share different perspectives on how vulnerable our food systems are, but also give us ideas that we can all put into action. Pocono Organics is one of the largest regenerative organic farms in North America and is a global center for research, education, and discovery, located atop the iconic Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania. I'm sitting here in our Food Forever garden, where these ancient seeds growing behind me represent the future of food and farming. Most of these seeds are backed up in the Arctic at the Svalbard Global Seed Vault in Norway. The Crop Trust is the steward of this commonly known Doomsday Seed Vault. We've taken a pledge of action and commitment at Pocono Organics to grow these forgotten and more nutrient-dense ancient varieties in order to reintroduce them into our food system. Pocono Organics is above all a health and wellness organization, fighting for the health of the people and planet. While our farm's footprint is large at 380 acres, we have 30,000 square feet of processing space and 40,000 square feet of greenhouses. Our impact on natural resources is small. For example, we collect 70,000 square feet of rainwater from our roofs to irrigate our greenhouse crops and draw power from a 25-acre, 3-megawatt solar farm. And we're proud that nearly 300,000 honeybees call our farm home. Our focus is on soil regeneration, not just sustainability. Actually, 2020 has been named the Year of Soil Health by the United Nations. So why does that matter today? Well, the UN said that we have less than 60 years of farming left in our soil. For comparison, we lose roughly 40 soccer fields per minute of soil. These numbers are staggering, but while the clock is ticking, we do have the ability to fix it. But we have to become doers, and it starts with each one of you doing something, anything, in your corner of the world. We is greater than me, and we can change the world together. Pocono Organics is a very personal mission to me and my way of being a doer. I suffer from a stomach condition called gastroparesis, which means I have a paralyzed stomach. I can't digest most fruits, vegetables, and meats like you all can. I have to eat like a toddler with purees, juices, and smoothies to get my nutrients. Doctors wanted to cut out parts of my stomach, insert feeding tubes, and put me on a regimen of medications to make me better. And I was about to be 30 and wanting to start a family, obviously not the road I wanted to go down. I started working with new doctors and adopted an organic, non-toxic lifestyle, and the results were undeniable. I went from being sick 5 days a week to 5 days a month, simply by using food as medicine. I may only get 10 bites of food a day, and I have to make sure each bite is as nutritious as it can be. I'll never be cured, but my quality of life is amazing compared to what it once was. And I was able to have a 9.3-pound baby. Pocono Organics started as a community farm where I could grow the crops that I had trouble sourcing. We partnered with the Rodale Institute, the global leaders in regenerative organic research and education, and have not only become their largest satellite farm, but have truly become a global center for research, education, and discovery to teach others about how food can be used as medicine and improve our quality of life while also healing the earth. It's funny sometimes how opportunity can arise out of adversity. It was 2 years ago today, September 25th, 2018, that I attended my first Food Forever experience in New York and was so inspired that we took the pledge of action to do something more for the world. And that led us to growing the food behind me and us all being together today. Well, almost together. I'm very sad that the full Food Forever experience was unable to happen in its original format due to COVID, but I am so happy that all of you throughout the world now get to attend this inspirational and magical event full of world-renowned speakers. I can't wait to hear what you will be doing in your communities to be a part of the solution in the years to come. I want to say thank you to the Crop Trust and Rodale Institute. It's truly inspiring and humbling to be a part of the work you're doing for all of us and all of humanity. We have a quote here in our office from Robert Swan to remind us every day of our mission. The greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it. Every one of you is powerful and capable of doing beautiful things in this world, and we encourage all of you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Thank you, and buckle up for this amazingly inspirational journey that you are about to embark upon. And don't ever forget that you can change the world.
Good morning. Welcome to the Food Forever Experience digital event. My name is Dina Delisa Gonzer, and I am honored to be guiding you through the first purely digital event by Food Forever. And what is even more exciting is people are joining us from all over the globe in an effort to drive positive attention and gain learning opportunities surrounding agrobiodiversity, conservation, and use. The task at hand is large, feeding 9 billion people by 2050. Are we on the right track? What can we do to continually champion this cause? Today, across panels and through keynote speeches, we will be discussing issues pertaining to conservation, science for breeding different crop varieties, putting them to use, and then how to breed for flavor with the help of farmers and chefs, product development, and business to cater to consumers. We will also have a chance as individuals to see what we can do in our own home and ways of living to create a more sustainable and resilient food system. Now, how can we rethink global food systems and feed a growing global population in the midst of climate change and post-COVID-19? We are so pleased to have with us the Executive Director of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, Stefan Schmitz. For more than 10 years, Stefan was leading the food security, agriculture, and rural development work at BMZ. In addition, he was senior advisor to the Secretariat of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. Stefan held various posts in the German federal administration in the fields of geographical information systems, regional planning, and the international cooperation on urban issues. To help us understand the challenge at hand and discuss how we can continue to take a proactive stance in safeguarding our crop diversity, please welcome Stefan Schmitz.
Good afternoon. Thank you all for joining me today at the Pocono Food Forever digital event. It is a pleasure to have the opportunity to address such an active and influential group, and I thank the hosts for working so hard to make this possible. I would like to start by inviting you to take a moment and really consider, what do you think food will look like in the future? Not only the food that you and your immediate community consumes, but food around the world. Does the future of food look like starvation and famine, droughts and floods, withered crops, dead livestock, instability, war? Does it look like artificial substances created in a factory? Or does the future of food look like enough natural, nutritious, colorful, flavorsome, sustainable food for all? Perhaps it looks like a combination of these, where some groups enjoy having enough, while others have too little or none. We are here today because we all care what that future looks like. That vision is important, because as a global community, we are building the foundation of that future right now. Laying the foundations for the future of food is not an easy task. Already, our systems are fragile, and the challenges will only get tougher. We ask whether we are on track to feed 9 billion people by 2050. In considering this question, we must consider not only quantity of food, but nutrition. Not only enough food, but distribution. Not only how much we can produce now, but what is sustainable. Not only the current context, but our options if everything changes. Our options when everything changes. And we must ask, will our food systems, so that which includes all processes and infrastructure involved in feeding a population, be able to cope with these inevitable changes? Food systems are complex and global. As mentioned, they encompass the entire network, from seeds and farms and harvesting to processing, packaging, distribution, transportation, consumption, waste disposal. These food systems are essential to every single human being. They are critical to economies, to health, to security. And currently, they are wasteful, destructive, unstable, vulnerable. Let us really think about this last point, vulnerability. Our present food systems are neither robust nor resilient. A single disruption can have devastating global effects. The current pandemic shows us just how swiftly a health crisis can disrupt food supplies. And in the midst of the climate crisis and biodiversity loss, we risk more and more disruptions. We know we will never be able to predict the future, but one thing we can be sure of is that we will suffer further crises. We also know that the more resilient our food systems are, the better equipped we will be to cope. So we must prepare as best as we can for the unpredictable. Resilience means being able to adapt to changing conditions. And it is how we as a global community manage these crises that will make the difference. It means having the resources to deal with disruptions. It means having multiple options. Crop diversity is a prerequisite for a resilient world. And this means conservation of our seeds, and it means use of these seeds. The most important and urgent action we can take today to lay a strong foundation for the future of food is to conserve and use our agricultural biodiversity. Loss of biodiversity is irreversible. To lose this diversity is to gamble away our options. And while conservation of seeds isn't everything, without this conservation, everything is nothing. But as long as agricultural biodiversity survives, stored in gene banks or in fields, then we will have options. We will have the resources and resilience our future needs. And we are surrounded by potential and possibilities for making this happen. We must only open our minds to that potential. We must be willing to take responsibility, to transform our thinking, to not only envisage the future of food as we want it to be, but to share that vision with others. And it is imperative we work together. That is the action we are taking today on this Global Day of Action, to seek what is possible and to learn what we can each do to build strong, resilient foundations, to put ourselves on track toward a future where everyone can enjoy enough, nutritious, colorful, sustainably sourced, delicious food. Thank you for listening. Be well.
Thank you, Mr. Schmitz. Now, when thinking about our food, most of us may rarely think of the simple fact that one tiny seed starts it all. A seed is one of the prime examples of the phrase small but mighty. Agrobiodiversity as a resource for food security. We need to preserve our seeds and breed them. However, it's not as simple as it sounds. Dr. Cary Fowler, a former leader of the Global Crop Diversity Trust, is the founder of the Saval Global Seed Vault. The Seed Vault provides ultimate security for more than 850,000 unique crop varieties, the raw material for all future plant breeding and crop improvement efforts. How can seeds help us feed a growing global population in the midst of unprecedented agricultural challenges? What is the role of seed banks and the Saval Global Seed Vault, and why do we need a global system of conservation and use to end hunger by 2030? Please welcome Dr. Cary Fowler as he addresses how our world can work together to ensure the success of crop diversity and conservation of seeds.
Hi, as you just heard, I'm Cary Fowler. I'm a former executive director of the Crop Trust and currently a senior advisor to the Crop Trust. Honestly, at my age, I think the emphasis is more on the senior part than it is on the advisor part. So given the fact that I've had a long history in this field, I thought I might just begin by telling you how I got involved in it. It was the mid-1970s. And I'd been hired to do research for a book that a couple of other people were writing. And I came across two articles by a man named Jack Harlan, who at the time was the president of the Crop Science Society of America and a professor at the University of Illinois. And I remember one sentence from each of those two articles. And the first sentence was that these resources, and he was talking about crop diversity, particularly crop diversity stored in gene banks. These resources, quote, stand between us and catastrophic starvation on a scale we cannot imagine. Now that would get your attention. And then I read another article by him, and he said, if you're willing to entrust the fate of mankind to these collections, you're living in a fool's paradise. So put those two sentences together. These resources stand between us and catastrophic starvation on a scale we can't imagine. However, if you're willing to entrust the fate of mankind to these collections, you're living in a fool's paradise. Well, obviously, this was a Houston, we have a problem kind of moment, except it wasn't just for a space capsule, it was for the entire Earth. So if you fast forward about 20 years in my biography, I was invited by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization in Rome to come to Rome and head up a multi-year assessment of the state of the world's plant genetic resources and to help the countries come up with a global plan of action of how to deal with it. It was an incredible learning experience for me. What I found was, in a nutshell, that there was no single gene bank in the world that operated on a secure multi-year budget. You might want to conserve these resources, this crop diversity forever, but you were going to do it on a year-by-year basis at best. Second was that there was a poor and often crumbling infrastructure. I remember going to one gene bank, and a gene bank, needs to be cold. You're going to keep frozen seeds in there. I entered the gene bank. I had a coat on because I expected it to be really cold. And instead, I instantly took off the coat because it was hot as hell. And what I found out was that the equipment, the freezing equipment, had failed, and the humidity was very high. And so they'd actually put some machines for drying seeds inside the gene bank to take the humidity out. But that, of course, was adding to the temperature. So that was, let's say, not a good day for the seeds in that seed bank. I also found that there were inadequate information systems. There was really no global information system. We had libraries, in a sense, without card catalogs or indices. There were poor connections with breeders and researchers, and there were gigantic regeneration backlogs. Seeds will remain viable for a long, long time, decades, even hundreds of years or longer. So if you have a well-functioning gene bank, you're not going to need to take seeds out and grow plants and harvest seed and put fresh new seed back into the seed bank. You're not going to need to do that very often. Let's say if your average seed was going to last 50 years, which I think is a small, short number, then you would need to take about 2% of your collection every year for regeneration purposes. When we surveyed countries, we were finding that their regeneration needs were 70, 80, 90, 100%. And this was only after 10 or 20 years of operation. And finally, what we found was that there was inadequate safety duplication. So if there was a problem in any of the gene banks, such as the one I mentioned where the equipment had failed, and you were losing a sample, the sample died, that was an extinction event, and you would never see that diversity again. Now, part of this situation was due to the haste in which the collections themselves had been made and the global gene bank system, such as it was, had been cobbled together. And this sort of occurred in a context where every country believed that it needed to have a national gene bank and it needed to protect what was theirs, whether the country had the wherewithal or had made the commitment to do so. Part was also an indication or a lack of appreciation for how interdependent all countries are for crop diversity. Now, you might think of the United States big and powerful in every sort of way, but if you look at the global wheat collections, for example, the United States has only 5% of the number of samples that are in gene banks. Ethiopia, 1%. Turn to corn, maize. Again, the United States has 5%, Brazil has 2%. In rice, the United States only has 3%, Ethiopia has less than 1%. So the lesson of this, the lesson that you can learn from these numbers is that we are all dependent on each other. No country is independent in terms of the genetic resources that it's going to need for its agriculture, certainly in a future that's going to be characterized by climate change. All countries are, in a sense, gene poor and diversity poor. This go it alone approach, however, that every man for himself approach couldn't obviously be the foundation for a rational, efficient, or global system, but this is where we were in the 1990s. Since then, actually quite a lot has changed, and I want to just mention 4 things that have changed. One is that we now have a global plan of action that was adopted by 150 countries for the first time in 1996. We have an international treaty on plant genetic resources. I think the first international treaty passed in this millennium. And third, we have the Global Crop Diversity Trust, the Crop Trust. I want to spend just a second on that. The Crop Trust is really has been a think tank as well as an implementing agency. It's been the real strategic force behind establishing a truly global system. The trust has the mandate, has a strategy, and it has a commitment to conserve all of the unique diversity in the world, plant crop diversity, in facilities that can actually provide reliable long-term conservation and provide access. The Crop Trust has taken a very hard-nosed scientific approach to that, which is exactly what's needed. And as you probably know, the Crop Trust was established, it's structured as an endowment, as a trust fund, which means that it can provide secure funding. So if you want to conserve something 50 out of 50 years, you have the budget in hand to do that because 49 out of 50 is not quite good enough. It's been a pioneer in establishing information systems. We're no longer in the situation where we have a library without an index. And it's engaged in activities that fill in the gaps of our collections. Recently, it's been very active in collecting and securing and researching the crop wild relatives, which is a major reservoir of new and additional diversity for our collections. So the Crop Trust was I would say, the third major thing that's happened that's been really good in recent years. And the fourth, I would say, would be the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. I think most of you are familiar with the seed vault, located near the North Pole, 78 degrees north. Let me say just three things about that, maybe three big picture things. One is, I believe that the seed vault demonstrates that countries and institutions can, in fact, come together to do something that's long-term and positive. I'm not sure there have been many other examples in our lifetime of countries coming together to do something like that, but certainly the seed vault is one of them. The second is that the seed vault now contains samples of more than 1 million different crop varieties. That's more than 125,000 different kinds of rice and more than 125,000 different kinds of wheat. 1 million in all. And during the more than 10 years that the seed vault has been in operation, it's not lost a single one of those samples. And what that means is that for those million samples of crop diversity, the extinction rate has been 0%, which is an amazing situation. And finally, I think the big accomplishment of the seed vault is that it's added to public awareness. People who didn't know what crop diversity was or why it was important now know about that. And part of that is because of the seed vault and the amount of publicity and interest that's spurred. There is a little bit of a downside to the seed vault, however, and that is that it can give people the impression that, well, the seeds are all locked away near the North Pole, and so, our work is done and everything is fine. And that wouldn't be true. There is much that remains to be done. Highest on the list, I think, is that the Crop Trust Endowment Fund needs to be completed. Governments, private sector, individuals need to step up to complete that endowment. And then we can begin to say that the job has been done. We need much more research on the collections themselves, certainly in the time of climate change. There's more collecting that needs to be done to fill in the gaps, and that's particularly true with some of the minor crops for which the collections are currently inadequate. We need to safety duplicate all of the major collections in Svalbard. There are a couple of countries that haven't done so yet. The reasons for that are increasingly seeming to be rather dubious, frankly. So the seed vault itself needs to be completed. And finally, there has to be better adherence to the terms of the international treaty, certainly regarding access, but also just regarding the actual national activities that governments are engaged in within their own borders to help build a rational and efficient system. In all of these things, the Crop Trust is really the leader. The role it plays is indispensable, and it's the only organization that can play that kind of role on a global level. And I think everyone actually realizes that. So let me conclude with just a couple of remarks. First, that conserving crop diversity and supporting its use in plant breeding is actually completely essential to having agricultural systems that are ready for climate change. But it's also essential even if you don't believe in climate change, but simply think that, well, we've been having a lot of bad weather recently, and farmers need crops that are adapted to that bad weather. So this is an issue, conserving crop diversity, an approach, a solution that I think can bring people together. And it's one of the few things that I can think of in the area of climate change that should appeal to everyone. What can you do? Well, you can help spread the word. You can write to your government representatives. I promise you, they haven't been getting many letters about this recently. So if you write one, they might wake up and pay attention. You can support science, of course, you can vote. And finally, if you really want to get your hands dirty in the soil, doing something very practical, listen to what my friend Emily Rose from the Seed Savers Exchange has to say about participation in that organization. And I'll hand it over to Emily Rose and everyone else on the next panel. Thanks a lot.
American agriculture has advanced more in the space of a single lifetime than world agriculture had in more than 7,000 years. History teaches that a nation grows according to its agriculture, the very basis of life.
The way agriculture's been industrialized is not sustainable at all.
The promise of regenerative agriculture is to grow in a way that will protect the next generation of farmers.
Agriculture can either be part of the solution or part of the problem.
One of the most fateful decisions in American agriculture is when we separated animal farming from plant farming. In a really properly functioning ecosystem, plants and animals are in this symbiotic relationship. Compare that, which is an ecological loop, to the factory model where you have inputs, outputs, and waste products. That's kind of where we are with our farming now. In the short term, it allowed us to produce a lot more food more cheaply.
But there are some side effects. Everything has a price. There is no such thing as a free lunch.
Agriculture is today responsible for 30% of total carbon emissions, 70% of the use of fresh water, 60% for the loss of biodiversity.
We are at the stage in which we really need to take action, because otherwise the problem will be amplified and the consequences will be enormous.
It's a failed system, and we have to move on from it. The best way to grow food and the best way to grow fiber is regenerative organic agriculture. Regenerative organic agriculture takes the best parts of organic agriculture and it builds on it and says, what's the best practices that we can use for soil health, for animal welfare, for labor, and for farmers? And it combines it into one standard. We need to create a world that has a future and is sustainable.
We know that there is a desirable future. It's not like we are lost. Whatever we do, there's no hope. There is hope. It's just going back to relying on nature to provide what nature has to provide, that we forgot how precious it was.
Our eating is one of the biggest contributors to climate change. We have to lower the carbon footprint of our diets, and that means eating less meat and eating from a food chain that is, instead of taking carbon out of the soil, is putting carbon back in. Agriculture uniquely has the ability to sequester carbon. So we're not just talking about mitigating a problem, diminishing its effect. We're talking about actually rolling it back.
It's not regressive to take things from traditional knowledge and take things from the advancement of technology and integrate those into something that's even better than the sum of its parts.
That's what we have to do to save the planet.
Welcome to our first conversation, yay, which will be centered around what can we do globally and locally to conserve agrobiodiversity. Specifically, what is the role of seed banks and seed savers in conserving agrobiodiversity and making it available to users globally? To help us understand these questions and the food systems that surround us, please welcome an absolutely dynamic group of leading women in this field. First, we have Eliane Ubalijoro. Eliane, excuse me for that, is the Executive Director of Clear International Development. She is a professor of practice at McGill University, a member of Rwanda's National Science and Technology Council, a fellow of the African Academy of Sciences, and a board member of the International Leadership Association. Welcome. Then next we have Ismahane Elouafi. She is currently the Director General of the International Center for Biosaline Agriculture, for which she has turned into a world-class research institution by spearheading the development and
implementation of the center's long-term strategy and expanding its mandate to marginal environments and agro ecosystem, as well as being ranked among the most influential women in science in the Arab world. Next, we have Emily Rose Haga. She is the Executive Director of Seed Savers Exchange. Seed Savers Exchange has played a leading and historical role in preserving, honoring, and sharing America's diverse garden heritage. Welcome, welcome. What an amazing list of accomplishments and an amazing group of women. I am certainly honored. I hope you're all well this morning.
Thank you, Dina. It's so good to be here.
Great. So first thing is first, I'm going to go to Eliane and spotlight the impact of COVID-19, local seed banks, and increasing local capacity building and leadership for communities to improve their agrobiodiversity management. COVID is disrupting this, as we know. How have things changed? What, from your perspective, the food systems, and they're extremely vulnerable. How have they become more vulnerable as this crisis has come about?
So my day job right now is I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Global Open Data in Agriculture and Nutrition.
Okay.
And so right now it's access to seeds that is really critical. And especially in Africa, where a lot of the trade hasn't been digitalized yet, it's a big issue because as safety measures to prevent COVID were being put in place, the risks were farmers being considered essential workers? Were they able to have access to seed? Was trade available? And for smallholder farmers who were taking seeds to market, to exchange and to buy, how was that availability possible for them? And also for farmers needing credit to access seed, really, it was a critical time in terms of the disruption has really created a lot of pressure in the logistical systems and highlighted the need to digitalize as much as possible to ensure that we can safely exchange seeds while keeping people safe.
And Emily, are you seeing similar trends here in the US?
Yeah, we have seen a really large increase in people seeking out seed from us and from other seed companies and organizations in the United States. We have seen some supply chain disruptions, either in supplies that are needed to get seed into the hands of people. We do worry a little bit about the effect of climate change across the world and other factors like the pandemic potentially disrupting seed supply chains too. So right now we're excited that many people are returning to their gardens and acknowledging how important seed is in our food security. But there's a lot of questions ahead of us too.
Certainly. And Ismahane, can you explain a little bit to some of us out there, what is biosaline agriculture?
So before I explain biosaline agriculture, Dina, if you may just hear my perspective on the COVID-19
as well. Of course, yes.
I think the COVID-19 is a historical moment. Now we talk pre and post. And what it does, in addition to what Eliane and Emily said, is that really it disrupted the prices. And the prices affected the lowest strata in every country. So when we talk about the poorest of the poor that works really in marginal environments, that their only income comes from their production, the fact that they don't have access to market to sell it, it's a huge issue. So the disruption of the supply, the increase of prices has affected them both in their nutrition, so they don't have enough to eat, and in their incomes, which is usually really very, very high risk. And we saw now that the poverty has increased. And we know that once we get the data post-COVID, I hope sometime soon, the number is going to be very high. So it's really a step back from our fight against poverty and against malnutrition, around which the whole global development agenda has been built up and the sustainable development goals were built up. On biosaline agriculture, it's basically agriculture using saline water. And that saline water could go up to the seawater. So the dream is that in the future, we could have agriculture 100% from seawater. And what does it mean, Dina, is that there is no limitation. Right now, the biggest limitation for agriculture worldwide, it's water scarcity. we don't have enough water, and the little water we have, we're going to be demanded for other sectors like industry, like mostly industrial and urban setting. So by finding in the biodiversity crops that have salinity tolerance, it opened up a huge source of new food system, new production system that hopefully could happen in many parts of the world and help alleviate poverty and hunger.
I see how everything is kind of a domino effect, one thing affecting the other. And so I'm wondering how can we bring back neglected crops to our fields, and how can these crops help restore the marginal ecosystems or help to aid in the increase in poverty we're seeing? If anybody wants to speak to that specifically.
The thing about neglected tropical crops, if I look at the most hungry in the world are in the tropics. And so the neglected crops are often climate resilient. And so they can grow in harsh conditions, and they're often very nutritious. And so these are really important in terms of combating malnutrition. So, and also for smallholder farmers, they have the capacity to easily multiply and keep stocks for themselves. So that's something that is really important in terms of local resilience, being able to keep having seed stocks, even though trade may be limited because of logistical issues related to COVID. And so this is a really important issue, not only to increase nutrition of local populations, but really increase their capacity to be resilient in these conditions. I mean, some of the discussions are, when will the whole planet have access to a vaccine when it's produced? And it may take, even when we have one, it may take a couple of years to get there. So our COVID situation could last a couple of years. So really, we need the resilience of neglected tropical crops to ensure that we don't have a dramatic increase in world hunger as we tackle COVID.
Okay. And how can sorry, go ahead, jump in, please.
If I might add, so the neglected underutilized species are really the bulk of biodiversity. So when we think about biodiversity, I'll give you some numbers. We have about 400,000 species on planet Earth. And those half million almost species, we know that 30,000 of them are edible. So it means over history, our ancestors eat them and they were good. Out of those 30,000, we have 7,000 that we have multiplied over years. We have multiplied in an economic way. But when you go right now to the market, you find only 125. Only 125. So when you think about it number-wise, you are leaving the 400,000 and you are focusing on 125. And this is unhealthy in terms of nutrition, in terms of income. It's completely, if you think about it, you will say you are crazy. We have all this biodiversity out there and we are not attempting to use it. And this is wrong. So by going to neglected underutilized species, what we are attempting to do is to bring some of them back. I hope we're going to be able to bring back 1,000, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000. And this is really very much needed if we want to balance out nature and go back to the balance that the planet Earth need to continue the life forward. Otherwise, we're going to be completely in a dead end.
And maybe I'll add a little bit of extra perspective onto that. So if you think about the history of agriculture for humanity, it's, about a 12,000 year history, and farmers and gardeners were the original stewards of our agrobiodiversity. So the fact that agriculture has changed so much in the last 200 years, and many people have kind of lost their connection to the food system, to the relationship with the land and with the food. And that's really changing our food system a lot. So now, most of us are reliant on going to the grocery store and getting food that has been really adapted for the industrialized food web that we're now a part of, which, is comprised of large-scale monoculture, really high input systems that rely on pesticides and chemicals. It's designed for long-distance distribution. So because of all of those factors, we are eating a lot fewer food crops that we would have back in our historical past. And so that's why I do think, the grassroots connection is so important to think about moving forward and keeping seeds in the hands of everyday people, because that's the way that we're really going to be maintaining food that is regionally diverse, culturally diverse, genetically diverse. People really do have a role to play, not just in the food that they're eating, but what they're willing to grow, the choices that they make about the food that they purchase, whether it's locally produced, whether it's sustainably produced. So I do think that people and their choices and being involved is really going to be important in maintaining those neglected food crops that might otherwise disappear in this globalized food system.
That's a great point, Emily. We actually have a viewer question that kind of piggybacks or relates to what you were just saying. We have Michelle J. from Northern Michigan, and she asks, how do we conserve and submit crop diversity from our regions that do well in our regions to preserve them? I think she's asking how can we conserve the specific seeds that we see do well in whichever region we're farming in or living in or gardening in?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, the first advice I would give is just to be observant in your gardens and look for those differences and look for, what is thriving and what is doing well in your location. And then from there, there's a lot of education that you can do to look into, how do I save seed from a variety? Are there special precautions that I need to take to prevent cross-pollination with another variety in my garden? Or am I safe to save seed without doing anything special? And so Seed Savers Exchange is a really great resource. I would encourage Michelle and anybody else in the audience to check out our website. Go to seedsavers.org/members. We have a number of resources and books and videos and other articles that you can access to learn how to save seed in your own garden, and keep in mind what kind of biodiversity you would like to save in your own garden as well.
Awesome. We have another question. Anthony from Hawaii. As 3 women with strong scientific backgrounds, how do you think science, technology, and innovation can help us in this gigantic task to safeguard all this agrobiodiversity? And anybody want to answer? Anthony, one of my 3 strong. Go ahead, Ismahane.
I can jump first, Dina. So I think really innovation and science, it's really our way out. And we are at a really cross point in history. We know more than ever a lot of things about plants, about biodiversity, about the genomics, about the phenotyping, about many things. So I think if you compare even today to only 20 years ago, we are far away. So we really came to a point where we understand even the nano levels. We understand the genomic levels. So we have to use it. Like if you think about monoculture spread across because it was needed. There was a lot of famines in the 40s, 50s, 60s that monoculture and the adoption of certain crops helped because they were genotypes that countries could grow. So, and plant breeding has been a bit centralized. Most of the countries in Africa, for example, they don't have their own breeding programs. And it's because it takes you about $100 million to have one variety. It's very expensive. And that's why the multinational jumped on it and took advantage of it. But now with the new technologies, the cost, it's really reduced like more than 10,000 times or even more. So we need really all the countries to really do their own genetic improvement, to develop the breeds and the crops that they need. They have to go back to biodiversity, select what works well for them, and do their own breeding programs to have it at scale. And science and innovation allows them to do that today. If we took only about gene editing, like anything about transformation in genetic used to take millions of dollars. Now it's like that, easy. So I think really science and innovation today could serve very much, but we need really to put it in applied and use it and know it. So capacity building, education, employment of youth that are very savvy with technology, all of this should come together to save biodiversity and to use it, because we are not saving it or conserving it for the sake of keeping it. It's reuse it and take advantage of it.
Thank you so much for that, Ismahane. Danielle from Connecticut writes, Eliane, can you tell us more about these neglected crops? Is there an example of a crop that really makes a difference and we should include in our diets?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of the crops I think of is Fonio, that's grown in West Africa. And so it's a cereal crop that is high in protein, that is climate resilient, that grows well in conditions where there's drought. And that's also a crop that women in the region are really familiar with. And so one of the things to realize is there's over 500 to 570 million smallholder farmers in the world. And many of those smallholder farmers are women. And so there are crops that women will tend to cultivate more and have access to. And so Fonio is one that I particularly love because it's nutritious and it's climate resilient. So I would definitely encourage, and I know you can get some here in the US. And so I know that I think after our section, there actually might be a short clip on Fonio. So I encourage you to stay along and watch the clip with Chef Pierre Thiam.
Great. Yes, you are correct. There is going to be a clip just about that. A question that I would like to pose to any one of you is in hearing Eliane talk about the specific crop that would be good to add to our diets, how can we as just everyday consumers use our power to make sure we are supporting new crops like this that come into market? How can we be, how can we be more aware so that we go and vote with our dollars? What steps can we take to be a part of that process?
Well, I can speak from a little bit of my experience, which is I think just going out into your local farmers markets and getting to know some of your local growers in your community sometimes can open your eyes up to new diversity than you would have accessed in a supermarket, for example. So when I was first connecting to agriculture after it being a disruption in the generations of my family, came from an agricultural background, was lost over a couple generations, I started to get reconnected to that through a CSA farm, a community supported agriculture farm in my community. And that was my first exposure to the fact that there were so many different food crops that could be grown within my region when I had only seen a handful of them previously in the supermarket.
And I think, Dina, really the consumer power is huge. As people that we all day long, either 3 meals or 6 meals, we have a lot of decision to make. And that decision could really give a chance to Fonio to grow more, for example, or to quinoa to grow more, to chichiwa. So really, as a consumer, we should really give more, pay more. That's also very important. Most of these crops are unaffordable to the poor because they became the food for only the rich people. So we need to increase production and we need to increase income for those farmers. So we need to pay, either they are local farmers or international farmers. We should choose diverse diet and we should be willing to pay more. Don't pay for the cheap. The cheap, it's overpriced, it's not the best.
Yes. And Ismahane, you bring me to another question that comes from a viewer that's perfect for this. Michael from, I apologize if I mispronounce this, from Stuttgart. There is a crisis with youth people that do not want to work in agriculture. Can you tell us experiences maybe you've had with young people or what we can do to incentivize them to stay in the field? And as you were just talking about how money and only if only the food is only for the rich people, but they're not willing to spend, how it can have a ripple effect. So along the same lines, if people don't want to work in agriculture because they're not incentivized to, what can we do to maybe encourage a younger generation of farmers or agriculturalists?
So I'd really like to speak to that. So Michael from Stuttgart.
Sure.
It's a very exciting time in the world, because at the same time as we should encourage regenerative agriculture, organic agriculture, ways to produce food in ways that really increase biodiversity to regeneration, there's also the opportunity to bring these regenerative practices and the best of the fourth industrial revolution in terms of digitalization to serve smallholder farmers. So right now, you could be a smallholder farmer working at seed conservation, working at promoting these neglected varieties, and at the same time, be connected locally and globally through digitalization, and actually be a tech entrepreneur working at how do we ensure that the biodiversity of the food we have reaches the most people on the planet who are really interested. And we have technologies like blockchain that can actually allow us to do traceability from farmer to plate and ensure that the most income possible goes back to the farmer. So I think we really have a great opportunity to bring technology to rural areas, to have what we call smart villages or smart rural areas, to really ensure that the most income can come and that we're using the best of technology today, because you had that earlier question around technology and innovation. And so that really needs to be of service to growing food sustainably and ensuring that we have good livelihoods for farmers.
Thank you so much for that. I am about to go build a smart farm in my backyard. I think we're about to wrap up, and I wanted to thank you for so much for coming in and sharing your expertise and relating this to the general public. I hope that people have been able to, and I'm more than sure they've been able to pull different things that they can do in their own lives to help support this effort. Before we leave, are there any last thoughts that we may have that we want to just leave with? Yes, Ismahane.
So what I want to say, really, just to add to what Eliane said, it's really agriculture. When we think about food, it's not only agriculture, it's the whole value chain. And when we talk about value chain, there is a lot of opportunities for you to come and grasp it. There is also the problem of food processing happening always in the urban area, which is completely wrong. You produce in one place, you transport it to the city to transform it. What if we develop the urban setting to do that transformation? And that's where youth, we're gonna help. We're gonna need a lot of youth, and we're gonna help enriching the whole agriculture value chain at that level. I wanna just give an example from Mali, whereby we put in small scale irrigation, and we had a startup called Iri Mali, and it's really for irrigation, little irrigation fixing that youth got together and created a startup. So we need a startup mentality in the urban area, and only youth can pick it up. Only youth can be really excited about it. Technology, innovation, startup, business around agriculture value chain.
Thank you so much for that encouragement. I know that I am encouraged. I'm sure our audience is encouraged to look at the choices and the world around us, and to try to make more of an impact in the choices we make in our everyday food, food consumption. Thank you so much for being with us today. And this panel was definitely inspiring. We appreciate all of your expertise and your views. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Pierre Thiam. I'm a chef from Senegal, a cookbook author, and the co-founder of Yolele. Yolele is an African food company that works with farmers with a mission of bringing economic prosperity to those farmers. Our network of farmers is in West Africa, in a region called Sahel, which is a dry region. Our vision is to bring crops that are underutilized, that are grown by those farmers, and introduce them to the rest of the world. Our first product is called Fonio. Fonio is an ancient grain that's gluten-free, that's very, very nutritious. Cooks in 5 minutes. It grows in poor soil, and it has deep roots that tend to restore the soil. 2 years ago, we started distributing Fonio, 3 years ago actually. We are distributing it through our brand across the United States at Whole Foods and other natural retailers. We're also doing it online, Thrive Market, Good Eggs, Amazon, of course, and our own shop at yolele.com. The idea of working with a network of farmers is a powerful one, thinking of having forward-thinking chefs joining a network of farmers to introduce uncommon crops, underutilized crops, saving biodiversity, but at the same time just satisfying the demand of a growing number of conscious consumers, diners who are starving for food source connection and diversity in their food. And that's why the Food Forever experience makes total sense. 2 years ago, I've participated in the New York City event, and it was just amazing to connect with all these chefs and farmers and see all these amazing underutilized crops. And I'm really looking forward to this digital version and the 2020 event. Thank you for having me.
Topsoil, nature's gift to us. It exists only upon a small favored fraction of the Earth's surface, and it averages a depth of only 6 inches. Your life depends upon these 6 vital inches. It is alive, it can be injured, and it can die.
What is soil?
What is soil? Good question.
Soil is where food begins.
Soil is the foundation of life.
There are more organisms in a teaspoon of soil than there are stars in the sky.
Soil makes death and life two sides of the same coin.
We have gone into a very dangerous path by choosing the life we wanted, the life of the plant, and finding chemical entrants that could just kill the rest of the life in the field. We have now sucked all the life out of the soil.
And you know, all life on Earth is dependent on 6 inches of topsoil. If we kill off all our soil, we're done for.
That topsoil has been washed away by water, or it has been blown away by wind. Everything has a price.
That model is not going to be the model for the future. The promise of regenerative agriculture is to grow in a way that will protect the ability for the next generation. It's really about making sure that we reintroduce the cycle of life.
Microbes break down this plant material and build their own cells. Agriculture can provide a lot more than just food and fiber. Soil has the ability to sequester CO2 that's in the atmosphere.
Soil and life have evolved together. There is no life without soil. There is no soil without life. We should really have a soil-centric revolution.
We have to have the market triggers, the policy triggers that will benefit farmers in the way that they will engage. I don't think we have much options on business as usual. We are talking here about the future of humankind.
We are very excited about our next presentation, the launch of the white paper, which discusses regenerative agriculture as a win-win practice and why it is ready to go global. Jeff Moyer has served the Institute for 43 years in positions such as Farm Director and Executive Director. The Board of Directors' decision to appoint Moyer as CEO reflects his expertise and influence in the organic community at large, as well as the tremendous recent growth of the Rodale Institute. Moyer started at the Rodale Institute in 1976 in the position of farm laborer. He became farm manager in 1982 and later served as farm director, supervising research and operations of the 333-acre experimental farm for 15 years. Mr. Moyer will be presenting the research findings along with Tom Newmark, who is the co-founder and chair of Carbon Underground, co-founder of Regeneration International, chairman of the Greenpeace Fund USA and the American Botanical Council, founder of Sacred Seeds, which is a plant conservation project administered by the United Plant Savers, and co-owner of Finca Luna Nueva, a biodynamic and regenerative farming operation in Costa Rica. The importance of biodiversity preservation is as much below ground as it is above. Please welcome Mr. Jeff Moyer and Mr. Tom Newmark as they present the Rodale Institute Regenerative Agriculture Research Findings.
I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm here for two reasons. First, to congratulate the Rodale family and the Rodale Institute for their multi-generational leadership in regenerative agriculture. The Rodale Institute can be credited with inspiring many of today's regenerative leaders on this journey. It's where I first learned about regenerative agriculture about 13 years ago. A visit to Rodale's farm lit my green fire, which has burned ever since. And from that evolved the 2014 white paper on regenerative agriculture and climate change. That paper was highly successful, inspiring many farmers, environmentalists, and government leaders to take a deeper look at the great hope of regenerative agriculture. It was a necessary paper, but sadly, it was not sufficient. Because as we all know, since 2014, the climate has continued its accelerating deterioration. In 2014, there were 397 parts per million of CO2, the powerful greenhouse gas, heating up the atmosphere. This year, the planet has exceeded 416 parts per million of CO2, and I'll convert that to tons of CO2. Since the first white paper, since 2014, humans have deposited 140 billion new tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, which threatens to fuel even greater climate chaos and create unlivable conditions on the planet. And as the United Nations announced on World Soil Day in December of 2015, soil destruction is so egregious now that if we don't figure out how to grow food and regenerate topsoil, then we may not be able to grow any food at all on the planet within 60 years. Since just 2014, agricultural malpractice has destroyed approximately 200 billion tons of topsoil, or 26 tons of topsoil lost for every human alive today. And think about it, only 60 harvests of food left if we don't change our ways. That is terrifying for all of us, especially as we contemplate our sacred obligation to our children and to future generations. This is the hard ecological reality, the context for the announcement today. But fortunately, since 2014, scientists, farmers, and ranchers have been on task, learning every day about what it means to be a successful regenerative farmer. These advances in understanding led the Rodale Institute to revisit its landmark white paper. And that leads me to the second reason I am here today, to congratulate Jeff Moyer and the entire Rodale Institute for once again taking a leadership position, a hard look at the science, and doing a brilliant job presenting the compelling research in support of regenerative agriculture. Jeff, turning to you, tell us now about Rodale's exciting work these past few years and what's led to this new white paper.
Thank you, Tom. Rodale Institute is excited to launch our new white paper focused on regenerative agriculture and the soil carbon solution. Not because the world is short on people and papers sounding the alarm around the problems of the climate crisis, but because we have a solution. We are all on this journey together, and we can all make a difference. While the white paper uses detailed scientific citations to document the situation we find ourselves in today, this white paper is not merely a revisiting of the problem or yet another dire report on the state of our planetary health. It is not even another wake-up call, asking the reader to pay attention to the science or on the climate crisis that we all see and literally feel around us. It is instead an invitation to journey in a new direction. It is intended to be both a roadmap for change and a call to action to follow a new path. A path led by science, but blazed by farmers and ranchers across the globe. We all make choices. We make choices on how we travel along this journey. We make choices on how we move around the planet, choices on how we heat and light our buildings, and choices on how we eat and what we wear. Of all the choices we make, the one we make 3 times a day can have the greatest impact: agriculture. The actual production of food and fiber holds the key for slowing, stopping, and even reversing the impacts of climate change. The decades-long work of data collection coming from the farming systems trial and vegetable systems trials at Rodale Institute, confirmed by the work of many other long-term research and demonstration projects across the country and around the world, clearly point to and support the idea that the way we farm has an immeasurable impact on our climate. And the most cost-effective way to have a positive impact on the climate crisis is to farm in a regenerative system. Our data documents that organic systems can produce yields that are competitive with conventional systems. And when weather patterns are unstable, as they often are, causing droughts or floods, yields in regenerative systems can be up to 40% greater. Organic systems improve soil health across a spectrum of indicators, including building soil organic matter. Organic systems use 45% less energy, emit 40% less carbon, leach no chemicals into the environment, and are more profitable for the producer. We as a species continue to allow carbon to be deposited in the atmosphere at a rate of over 6 billion tons a year. And we actually incentivize poor soil management, facilitating the loss of 4 tons of soil for every person on the planet every year. And yet, there is hope right beneath our feet. There is a biotechnology for massive planetary rehabilitation that is tested and available for widespread dissemination right now. The cost is minimal and it is adaptable to local contexts all over the world. It can be rolled out tomorrow, providing multiple benefits beyond climate stabilization. The solution is regenerative farming. Not just business as usual industrial farming, but farming like the earth matters. Farming in a way that restores the health of our soils, the quality of our water and air, ecosystems, animals, biodiversity, and ultimately humanity. Farming that improves our soil's natural ability to function so the planet and all of its life can also function. This kind of farming is called regenerative agriculture. As scientists, we know we don't have all the answers, but over the past 6 years since we released our last carbon climate paper, our knowledge has matured. We know enough to have demonstrated the indispensable role of regenerative agriculture for food security, farmer economic benefits, and the healing of our broken water, nitrogen, and carbon cycles. This paper is thoroughly documented and supported by farmer and rancher practitioners and scientist interviews. Together, we both sound the alarm and proclaim the regenerative farming solution. It's time to start our journey with a brighter future for our planet and ourselves as the destination. Thank you.
Welcome to our second panel of the day, where we are going to be looking at the correlation of seed banks to farm to table. What if forward-thinking chefs joined a network of miners starving for food source connection? And Rodale Institute will present its regenerative agriculture research findings, and you'll hear directly from farmers and chefs alike on how they are using seed banks and other resources to grow, eat, and celebrate local biodiversity and face the climate crisis. I'm excited to announce at our panel. First up, we have Erik Oberholtzer. I'm sorry, today I've got a lot of marbles in my mouth. And he is a chef, social entrepreneur, and food activist. He is co-founder and chairman of the Los Angeles-based Tender Greens, which I have been to. It's great. A healthy food restaurant chain. Tender Greens started with a mission of providing seasonal home cooking at affordable prices to as many people as possible. Erik is also a Food Forever champion and leads the Spice of Life project in collaboration with the Crop Trust. And then next up, we have Yichao Rowe. Yichao is a soil scientist with a focus on improving soil health and environmental sustainability through regenerative practices. Yichao oversees soil health research at the Rodale Institute, supporting all short and long-term projects. He also leads outreach initiatives to educate the public and farmers on the benefits of improving soil health. Then next we have Dani Nierenberg. She is the co-founder of Food Tank, a 501c3 nonprofit organization focused on building a global community for safe, healthy, nourished eaters. And Food Tank is a global convener and a research organization and non-biased creator of original research impacting the food system. The summits are one of the most important forums bringing together all sides of food issues for critical discussion, partnered with major universities and moderated by food journalists. Welcome, Dani. And then next up, we have Zach Wolf. He is the farm manager at Caney Pork Farms, serves as a board member of Demeter USA, and is a former research fellow at the Nature Institute. Welcome, Zach. I'm excited to have all of you together in one place. So I'm thinking of starting with soil health and soil health management, because I know, you got to start with those building blocks. Yichao, what is your view on soil health management and what role does biodiversity play?
So soil health is directly related to some of the most important and urgent issues we're facing, including climate change, food security, nutrient density, and water quality. And if we want to solve all those issues, then the solution is on our feet. And soil health management, it's something that we have been promoting for a while, but in the recent decade, we realized that soil microbiomes play a critical role to the health of soil and the ecosystem services. So it's the fungi and bacteria that play the most critical role in supporting the nutrient cycling, storing the carbon in the soil, and making the food sustainable.
And Zach, would you like to maybe add in with this as from a farmer's perspective, working even like directly with the soil, maybe what direction we should be taking in conserving this and safeguarding the soil health?
Yeah, I mean, when you say soil health, what I think of are like a suite of properties that the soil can exhibit when it enters that state of health. So water holding capacity, the ability to hold and store nutrients, and the ability for that soil really to protect the crop itself. So we don't think of this, but like what the plants and animals that we're producing in a farm and growing, their quality is directly related to the quality and the health of the soil. And Rodale's done a great job of hammering this message home. And then that health works its way up the food chain into our own health and our own system. So, it's like from a regenerative ag standpoint, from a biodynamic standpoint, from an organic ag standpoint, this idea of soil health is really central. And getting back to this idea of diversity, when I think of our farming system here at Caney Fork Farms, we manage about 750 acres, and we have animals grazing, we have trees producing nuts, we have vegetables growing in gardens, and all of that diversity interrelates and works together to actually improve the quality and the health of the soil and then the system overall. And that system is the quality of the water that's moving through the farm, the habitat for biodiversity, even the quality of the air. And you could even say maybe the quality of the light penetrating through the atmosphere that greets us when we're on the farm is all related back. So soil health is, I'm so glad it's becoming part and central part of this conversation.
Yeah.
We have to remember that it's all interrelated and comes back up to our own human body and our own health.
Yeah. Yeah. And Erik, hearing that it's all related and it comes back up to our human body and our health as a chef, what do you feel is your role in advocating for the greater agrobiodiversity in the field? Like when you hear Zach talk about how it works on the farm, what does that stir up inside of you as a restaurant owner and a chef?
Yeah, as a chef, I want the best tasting ingredients. So healthy soil from seed varieties that are interesting and grown in the peak of their season in a microclimate that they thrive in, make it a lot easier for me as a chef to make delicious food. And if food is craveable and delicious and sometimes mind-blowingly surprising, then consumers are going to embrace it. And when they embrace it, then we're supporting healthy soil and vibrant organic food systems.
Yes. And Danielle, you've been leading discussion on food systems for years. And what are the main structural shifts that you've seen in the last few years in regards to how people see their relationship with food and health and climate?
It's such a good question, and I think it's become so much more important because of COVID-19. People are really thinking about the health of their food in different ways, and realizing that, as Zach said before, everything's interconnected. There's a very holistic way of looking at this. Because of COVID, folks with diet-related diseases are suffering more from COVID. The mortality rates for folks with diet-related diseases are higher. And so, I think you're seeing now, just over the last 6 months, we've seen it over the last few years for sure, but a real shift over the last 6 months in how people think about the food system, where their food comes from, the story behind it, how it's grown, and why it's grown in certain ways. And I think that's, it took a pandemic for a lot of folks to realize that soil health is important and that science is important. Listening to the previous speakers and panels, I think there's a lot to be said for understanding that science is central to all of this, and that a lot of the science that went into creating indigenous crops and preserving them over centuries is central, and recognizing that indigenous and traditional knowledge of science, I think, is really important.
Yichao, in speaking about the science, could you briefly talk about what we have found and what people can do to make positive changes in how we treat the soil?
Sure. So today, Rodale Institute just released its latest white paper, Regenerative Agriculture and the Soil Carbon Solution. It's a powerful voice because what we found is that in the last century, all the global cropping soils have lost about 30 to 50% of carbon. And according to the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, agricultural activities, especially the conventional industrial agriculture, are responsible for about 1/4 to 1/3 of the global greenhouse annual emissions. And through our research, we showed that shifting the global cropping and pasture system to regenerative systems, and we can offset more than 100% of the global annual carbon dioxide emissions. And that solution, we can solve the global climate crisis and improve the human health and other issues.
And so leading to Zach, how is the scientific community working with local actors to ensure this information and this knowledge and best practices surrounding soil and farmland management translate to sustainable food systems in the long term?
Yeah, thanks for connecting it back. And just to connect it back to that last statement of this potential that's there. Like, I just want to rest with that, and this, this language, solving something and solving a problem, I think is powerful. Also, the vision for what's possible, like talking about the flavor and I think you used the word surprise, and like the also experience that awaits us if we step into this moment is so exciting. It's powerful. And it's really about this new way of human relating. It's this new way of human beings engaging with their environment, enjoying food. And I think to your direct question of actually doing science and asking questions. And that piece of it, and back to Danny's point about like indigenous knowledge, and I love that you use the term science to describe that, because it's not, you know, we think of like science as like a Western owned thing. And to me, that speaks to this sense of curiosity, wonder, and maybe even intuitive knowledge that is part of the human experience. And how does that look like? Where does that sit with Western knowledge and Western science? And I feel strongly that it's not either or, it's like a yes and how do these two things work together inside the scientists themselves? And so a big part of the work that we're doing here at Caney Fork Farms is actually to introduce scientists, new scientists. I'm wearing two hats today. One is my Skidmore hat, and then the other is my farm manager hat. And we are blessed to be hosting a research program that we're working with multiple universities and organizations. But one of the key ones is Chris Covey and Charlie Bedigal at Skidmore College, and two of his students that are here on the farm now and have been living and working on the farm for almost a year now. And so this situation with COVID has actually opened up this moment where the students are staying, because it's a great place to be a student, and engaging directly in the farm while continuing to develop their skills as scientists. And I think that relationship between new scientists and new question askers and the land itself, and the direct relationship with the land itself, is what's needed to continue to ask the right questions and have the right knowledge be received by us and delivered to the community.
Dina, can I build on that point?
Yes, sure, please do.
I mean, I think that, you know, Zach really said it all there, but this idea of participatory research, I mean, for so long, the paradigm has been that, you know, researchers, you know, in offices or laboratories or in their own test fields are doing this work in isolation. They're not working with farmers directly. They're not working with members of the BIPOC community. They're not, you know, reaching out to the communities that their research will ultimately affect, and shifting that to a new paradigm of where, you know, farmers and traditional knowledge is at the center of it, and that is used to inform scientists and make them, you know, make those farmers part of the process. Like, that's really game changing. And what Zach is doing, you know, able to do on his farm, that should be a model for farms all over the world.
Right. So we have our first question from our viewers out there, and it's Marie from Sweden. She says, I am a restaurateur and I've always wanted to increase the biodiversity in my menu, but really have trouble with sourcing. Do you source these new crops or do you grow them yourself? How do you ensure the reliability of this sourcing? Maybe Erik, you might want to jump in on this one.
Yeah, this is the shorter the supply chain for a restaurant, the more connected you are. So this is all a continuation of the local food movement, and partnering with a farmer you trust, a farmer who is forward thinking, and working with them to farm with a great deal of diversity, whether it's within a single ingredient like a potato, and unlocking the magic of many, many different varieties of potatoes, or introducing a new crop to the Swedish supply chain that's going to thrive in that ecosystem. And in some cases, you might look abroad because you can't find an unusual ingredient, a new ingredient that is really important to agrobiodiversity globally. For example, Fonio or amaranth or finger millet. So the more you collaborate with the key partners along the supply chain, the way you always have, the better you can work through some of the challenges of sourcing reliably.
Yeah. Or you could just plant chocolate peppers in your own garden, see how they turn out, like I did.
Exactly.
So we have another question, Alex from Chicago, specifically for Danny. Danny, I follow Food Tank closely, and I've noticed that polarization in politics also has a strong toll in terms of how different groups feel about food. Do you believe there is more polarization now in today's food issues or not? And how important is it to promote dialogues like the ones you're driving?
I think that's a great question. And yeah, there has been so much polarization, but I think so many of the issues that we're talking about, they're really not partisan issues, right? We're talking about hunger, we're talking about food and nutrition security, we're talking about, diversity. These should be issues that everyone can embrace. And I think it's really up to all of us, not just on this panel or part of today's conversations, but to bring the civility back to how we talk about food and realize that, food politics is something that, is gaining traction. Marion Nessel likes to talk about this idea of not only voting with your fork, but voting with your vote. And I think that's more important than ever before, really educating yourself about what your lawmakers, the people who represent you, who you hire, how they vote on issues that you care about around food and agriculture. So you really have to educate yourself. It puts a lot of onus on these citizen eaters, but it's really necessary during these times.
Certainly. Then we have Claire from Brooklyn. Can this regenerative agriculture approach be applied anywhere, even in urban gardens or in a deteriorated landscape such as a desert? And maybe Zach or Yichao would like to take that.
Zach, do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, I think I can comment on a few things. So the term regenerative agriculture, it's about the principles. But we have so many different, regions in the world, different climate, different soil type, different, for traditions. So each of these regions people can do things a little bit differently. But the fundamentals, principles are the same. That is to mimic the nature, to help the soil microorganism, microbiomes to do their work, to provide intact soil structure, to maintain the soil diversity, to let them do the work, nutrient cycling, carbon storage, right? But in different places, people can do things a little bit differently. People can grow different, crops that are native to their regions because those things evolved with different, specific climate and soil type. But the principles, I think there's no doubt that we can apply the principle of regenerative agriculture in any places of the world.
Yeah. Can I add just one thing?
Yeah, go ahead, Zach. Please add.
I love that statement, and I would almost make it almost like a little bit more, not aggressive, but forceful, and say this is the only thing that's going to work in these different contexts. It's not like, can regenerative ag and the principles of soil health and crop cycling and biodiversity work? It's like, that is what is going to work and has been proving itself out again and again, has worked in the past, is working now, will work in this future that we're going into where it's more uncertain. There's more, weather events that are like way off the charts in terms of rain or drought or fire or whatever. And so this idea of adaptiveness, understanding the context of your place and building in resiliency is those words are going to be spoken more and more or need to be spoken more and more to discover how to rebuild a culture that is unique and not so homogenous across the different pockets of this country. That's exciting for me.
Okay. Great. As we come to the end of this panel, I would like to leave the audience with sort of a sense of urgency, some action items that they can grasp and take into their own hands to be a part of the solution. And sometimes when we think of soil health, maybe that feels a little bit above the regular amateur gardener like me. What choices can I make in my everyday life as I choose to garden and buy food that can support support this this effort or endeavor? Maybe Erik, would you like to speak to even just how tender greens can kind of bring how you can bring tender greens branding to the consumer and make them feel more a part of the culture that you are trying to create with your restaurants and being supportive of agrobiodiversity?
Yeah, I think it's, first as a chef and restaurateur, you challenge yourself to really support those who are growing in this manner, and then challenge our farmers and our makers to go deeper into following regenerative organic principles and leveraging all the different varieties of seed stock that promotes a more diverse food system, and then bring that to consumers in these moments of delicious surprise, so that they become accustomed to getting outside of their comfort zone and discovering ingredients that otherwise they would be unfamiliar with. And I challenge consumers to get outside of zones of comfort, whether you're in the market or in a restaurant, and taste something new, because oftentimes that's where your diversity is.
I love that, and I'm definitely looking forward to challenging myself to that as well. I just want to thank each and every one of you for lending your time and expertise today. We really appreciate you participating in the Food Forever initiative in this panel today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Our next keynote speaker is the chef and co-owner of Blue Hill and Blue Hill at Stone Barns, and the co-founder of Row 7 Seed Company, author of the New York Times best-selling book, The Third Plate, Field Notes on the Future of Food. Dan Barber works to bring the principles of good farming directly to the table. His revolutionary approach to gastronomy is detailed in the book, taking a reader on a journey, understanding ecosystems, learning to manage the soil and the landscapes, and then creating a gastronomy that makes sense for each specific territory, which aligns with the experience created for you when dining at Blue Hill Stone Barns, as I have had the distinct pleasure of doing so. Barber has received multiple James Beard Awards, including Best Chef, New York City in 2006, and the country's Outstanding Chef in 2009. He has also been featured on the acclaimed Netflix series, Chef's Table. How do seasonal, circular, local, and many other buzzwords related to sustainability make sense, and how are they applied at Blue Hills at Stone Barns? And as founder of Row 7 Seeds, please welcome Mr. Dan Barber as he gives us insight into this question as well as the interconnection between more nutritious foods and healthier seeds.
Jane Jacobs loved her neighborhood. She lived in Greenwich Village in New York City in the 1960s. Her neighborhood was made up of many different kinds of businesses and many different kinds of people. Jane saw that it worked. She saw that it flourished because it was chock full of diversity. Where sociologists saw a frenetic and haphazard neighborhood, Jane saw a dynamic organic order. Where politicians saw rundown old buildings, she saw opportunities for young businesses to make a start. Where urban planners saw confusion and ugliness, Jane saw an ecology of appetites. But Jane had a problem, and it was a big one. His name was Robert Moses. Robert Moses built more parks, beaches, parkways, and thundering expressways than anyone else in any city's history. If you have visited New York City, you have driven down, walked through, sat in, or sailed into something that Robert Moses created. And he did it by destroying the kind of neighborhoods Jane Jacobs loved. He found them old-fashioned and inefficient. He leveraged the law to tear down old buildings. He dismantled the city's shared commons to build highways and towering apartments. And then in the 1960s, at the very height of his power, he planned to do just that in Lower Manhattan, an expressway through Jane's neighborhood, through Washington Square Park, and then a major highway through Soho. To everyone that mattered, from City Hall to the Municipal Art Society to the American Institute of Architects, this was a great idea. An expressway through Greenwich Village. I often think about this on my walk home from my restaurant, Blue Hill, with my daughter Edith, through Washington Square Park and up Fifth Avenue into the heart of Greenwich Village, sort of following the contours of this very nearly built expressway. We are, Edith and I and my family, and the restaurant. And really anyone who has walked the streets of Greenwich Village, the beneficiary not only of Jane's vision, but of her determination and fight. Through her activism, she showed how diverse neighborhoods, given the support, self-organized and prospered. She mobilized her community to speak out against the idea that city planners had the right to dictate from up high. Jane won, which was impossible to imagine back then. But her biggest win is that today, we cannot imagine her having lost. Nowadays, no one wants to build expressways through small, diverse neighborhoods. Today, it's common sense. But in the 1960s, it wasn't. To post-war planners like Moses and just about everyone else in government and business, cities needed a redesign. a master plan for the future. Above all, they needed efficiency and order. Streets that should become machines to move cars, not people. Housing that should value uniformity over identity. Robert Moses and his vision, this master plan for my neighborhood, Greenwich Village, came to mind last year on a visit to the Salinas Valley. Thanks to ideal weather and extraordinary soil, Salinas is considered one of the richest agricultural areas in the country. It calls itself the salad bowl of the world, and rightfully so. Most of the year, 9 out of every 10 bowls of salad eaten in the US come from this strip of land not far from where I was standing. And so there I was, driving from the airport to Salinas. Valley was this endless carpet of lettuce. Make that 2 carpets, romaine and iceberg. Giant chemical sprayers roam the field. Large trucks lined up at distribution centers. All of it amounted to a factory that transformed fields into boxes of bagged lettuce. But what really grabbed my attention were the plants themselves. Tens of thousands of rows surrounding me in this mystifying, almost military-like uniformity. I crouched down in between 2 rows to get a closer look, and I felt like I was on another planet. Not a leaf out of place, no rips or insect holes, no color variation. It's as if these lettuces were not the product of sun or soil or insects or water. You'd be forgiven for thinking they were manufactured, pre-programmed. And in many ways they are. The seed itself is a kind of software that dictates the exact size of the lettuce. Too long or too short by an inch, it won't fit in the box. If it doesn't fit in the box, it won't fit in the shipping crate. And if the shipping crate is not full, it won't stack on the delivery truck or on the rail car. So there it is, lettuce, the most eaten fresh vegetable in the United States, is engineered to fit a box. And it's not just lettuce, and it's not just boxes. Squash, beets, barley, and nearly everything we eat in this country and increasingly around the world is designed for efficiency. Just as Robert Moses tore down old tenements to build highways, industrial agriculture, and let's be clear, the seed companies that make industrial agriculture possible, they have uprooted ecologies, and they've replaced them with monocultures. They've argued that advances in seed technology would take care of feeding a growing population. They argued that diversity is inefficient. And in this, they have been wildly successful. We're down to eating like 12 crops. And here is the worst part. None of it tastes good. Not one thing. This year, we have seen this industrial model fail again and again. We're in a moment right now where we need to demand a more resilient and just system for the future. The answer is not more efficiency or some kind of new master plan. If there is one prescription for a more resilient food system, it's diversity. Diversity on our farms, diversity with our ecosystems, diversity in our diets, diversity in our communities. Diversity which can only be realized, as everyone here knows, by starting with our seed supply. How do we sustain and honor the diversity of the past and the present, which is increasingly under threat? And how do we build on it? Creating a whole new set of vegetables and grains, honoring the past, celebrating the present. That will not only withstand the challenges we face for the future, but do it deliciously. That's why we started Row 7, an organic seed company that brings plant breeders, chefs, and farmers together to develop new varieties for flavor and for organic systems. And it's a mission carried out every day by indigenous seed keepers around the world who are stewarding a 10,000-year-old science of plant breeding and selection. This work demands more than our support. It demands our participation. Just as Jane Jacobs mobilized her community, we need to mobilize regional communities of farmers, plant breeders, seed keepers, chefs, activists, and eaters to engage with seeds the way that humans have for thousands of years. Seeds not as commodities, but as a vital part of our cultural commons. Seeds not as software, but as living systems. Seeds as a blueprint for the future of food. Thank you very much.
I'm Ska Motene from Lesotho. I'm the founder and chairperson of the Ska Motene Foundation, an organization that helps to bring simple, sustainable solutions to local rural communities to establish abundance in food. I would like to tell you about one of my favorite crops, which is sorghum, or mabele in Sesotho. This gluten-free crop is highly nutritious, drought tolerant, and can be used in a variety of dishes. Sorghum berries can be simmered in water or stock on their own, or together with your favorite grains to make a super dish. The flour can be used to make delicious beverages, also to make crispy, crunchy flatbread to accompany your seasonal salad, or cut up into croutons for soups. With the Food Forever campaign, I support the establishment of genebanks and diversifying our crops and livestock to address the global food insecurity and safeguarding crop species for future generations.
Our next keynote speaker is Dr. Zach Bush, a physician specializing in internal medicine, endocrinology, and hospice care. He is an internationally recognized educator and thought leader on the microbiome as it relates to health, disease, and food systems. Dr. Zach founded Seraphic Group and the nonprofit Farmers Footprint to develop root cause solutions for human and ecological health. His passion for education reaches across many disciplines, including topics such as the role of soil and water, highlighting the need for a radical departure from chemical farming and pharmacy. And his ongoing efforts are providing a path for consumers, farmers, and mega industries to work together for a healthy future for people and planet. Please welcome Dr. Zach Bush to speak with us about human and planetary transformation through regenerative agriculture.
I am so grateful to be with all of you today. It is a real opportunity for us to connect as human beings in a tipping point moment of history, certainly for our species, but also for our entire planet. It's been an extraordinary decade for me as a scientist and a physician to be witness to the collapse of human health on a global scale. And that collapse of human health that has been brewing for the last few decades is now accelerating at a rate that is very hard to wrap any of our minds around. If we look at our children today, we see an acceleration of chronic disease that could have never been imagined years ago. Our children today are suffering from a chronic disease at a rate of about 54% of our children, not just in the United States, but also across Europe and Germany, for example. This devastating effect on children is demonstrating something about what it means to be human. Being human has gone through a paradigm shift that is larger and more disruptive than any other scientific point of change that I am aware of. Certainly it must have been disruptive in 2,000 years ago when Pythagoras discovered that the world was round and not flat. Certainly, it was profoundly disruptive to not only science, but religion and the rest when in 1600 Galileo discovered that the Earth was not at the center of the universe, but instead we were swirling in a small galaxy in the midst of billions of other galaxies. it is very difficult then to realize that the paradigm shift that we're under right now in our understanding of human health is even more profound. And that profound realization is that the human cell is not at the center of human life, nor health. In fact, not even disease. The human cell is in fact the result of a complex biodiversity around us. Just as Dan Barber was recognizing in the gardens the importance for biodiversity to return to our food system, we have come to the realization that if we do not rapidly re-engage nature for a biodiversification of the human experience at the cellular level, we will disappear from this earth. We are now seeing one species go extinct every 20 minutes around the world. It is estimated that we've lost 50% of life on Earth over the last 50 years, and it's accelerating. We are simply in line with the rest of biology on Earth as we see the collapse of the physiologic capacity for life itself on our planet. You can imagine for a moment Spock landing on those distant planets and asking me beam back up to Scotty and reporting back to Captain Kirk that this planet is able to inhabit life. Isn't it interesting and terrifying that we are engineering a world that can no longer support life? And we can learn a lesson for the mechanisms by which we've done this by the history of our planet. There's been 5 other great extinctions in the history of our planet, and each of them have begun with a destructive event around our soil systems. When we lose soil on the planet, we lose the ability for the planet to breathe. The respiratory cycle of the earth, as it breathes in carbon dioxide, changes it into oxygen availability and breathes out a combination of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. That planet Earth breathing is what allows for all of the niches of life to occur. It is the interaction of water, soil, and air that makes this magic that we call Earth. This little blue ball floating in dark vacuum space is made habitable by the interaction of those 3 environments, and the only one that's really living in its full force is the soil itself. And so the soil is informing the microbiome and vitality of the air and water systems. And when the soil fails, both other compartments acidify. The air becomes acidic with too much carbon dioxide and methane, and the oceans become acidic in trying to absorb that carbon dioxide and methane. We are in the midst of that failure again. Just as we saw the disappearance of the dinosaurs and 87% of life on Earth 55 million years ago, we now march into the same extinction process through the death of our topsoils. It is very fascinating that it is human ingenuity and in fact Western civilization that set this in motion. If you pick up any Western civilization textbook, you'll read that the beginning of Western civilization began at the invention of the plow in 900 AD. 1100 years ago, we began our terrorism, our destructive warfare on the soil itself. And unknowingly, we started our march towards extinction in that moment. The reason for the plow was to create mass production. And we have now taken that over the last 50 years to an extreme never imagined before. As Dan Barber so distinctly describes to us, the destruction of the biodiversity of the entire food system down to 12 fruits and vegetables is a good demonstration of what's happened in the soil itself. We have destroyed the microbiome diversity in the soils of our agricultural systems, and in the same moment destroyed the soils of the organic system of our gut. The human microbiome within us predicts and actually maintains the human cellular life. If you haven't heard recent reports, you are at least 90% bacteria. Only 10% of your cells, when you're considering the human and bacterial populations, only 10% are human. In the same way, 90% of the work done in the human body, whether it be enzymes for metabolism, digestion, detoxification, or fuel production, is done by bacteria. We have not even begun to take into consideration the role of fungi and parasites and protozoa in this maelstrom of the incredible microbiome within us and around us. Those will dwarf that of the bacteria. It will not surprise me that if in the next few years you hear from scientists that human cells only account for 0.1% of the mix of cellular life in and around you. For that, we have to rearrange everything that we do to prevent our own extinction and the extinction of the planet around us. We have to reorient ourselves to understand that vitality and life on the planet and within the human comes out of a communication network of microbiomes speaking to one another. If we fail in communication, we fail in diversity. There's a lot to be learned in our politics and sociology as well in that. What we find again and again in our laboratory, taking the observational studies of collapse of soil health to collapse of human health, we've been working on the exact correlation or causation therein. And the causation comes down to antibiotics. It turns out that the herbicides that we use on our crops on a regular basis are the most abundant antibiotics in our planetary technology today. The first of these potent antibiotics would be glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in the weed killer Roundup. We started using it in abusive ways in household gardens, on our driveways, sidewalks, schoolyards, road systems, and the rest in the 1980s. In 1992, we decided to turn that abuse directly upon our food, and then we started spraying wheat, especially in northern climates, with that compound. And that compound would wipe out the microbes of the soil, and then when consumed in our food, would wipe out the gut microbiome diversity. And with the loss of diversity, we lose the communication network between the system. And when you lose wireless communication network, it's much like your cell phone. You're suddenly disconnected from grandma, your workmates, your calendar doesn't update, and you are becoming disconnected and you become dysfunctional as an element within your community. And it turns out we see in this laboratory the exact same thing unfold as we pour glyphosate into systems, lose microbiome diversity and cellular communication. We lose the ability to repair and regenerate at the cell level. We fail to start to produce the proteins that form the protective shells, the detoxification, the antioxidants, and the rest within our body systems. And so in the end, we find in the laboratory that with the failure of the microbiome's diversity, we end up as an isolated and lonely species. And in that isolation, we start to present massive amounts of disease burden. The first to go as we start to create isolation is actually our own self-identity at the cellular level, which is pretty bizarre. With the loss of the microbiome, bacteria, fungi, all of the rest, we actually lose our cellular self-identity. And what I mean by that is the boundary event, which is primarily the gut lining, but also the skin and the sinonasal cavity and your lungs, begin to lose their barrier between the outside world. Sitting right behind that gut lining is some 80% of your immune system that's there to protect you from the outside world if an injury occurs. When the gut opens up and you fail to have that boundary event, the immune system begins to get confused as to what's inside and what's outside, what is you and what is the other. And in that moment of losing your self-identity, losing that polarity of inside and outside, we develop all kinds of disorders that have become normal in our children today. These include asthma, allergies to foods, allergies to their environmental inhaled pollens and dust and all the rest, eczema, psoriasis, autoimmune disease, infertility, major depression, anxiety disorders, sleep disorders, and ultimately cancer. This march towards cancer is something that we have never before witnessed in our children as we have today. You may be aware that there's some 90,000 court cases suing Monsanto Bayer now for the toxic exposure to Roundup causing leukemia. Unfortunately, we find in our children today that their cancer journey is not at all limited to leukemia. We are seeing sarcomas. These are tumors that we would not have seen in children or adults until geriatric levels in decades past. We see sarcomas of the heart, we see sarcomas of the bone, we see sarcomas of soft tissues. We then see respiratory failures, we see lung cancers developing in young people, we see colon cancer developing in young people, even our most elite athletes now showing this vulnerability to colon cancer. We have literally created, through our isolationism, through our warfare against the microbiome with herbicides, pesticides, and the antibiotic daily exposure that we get through our soaps, through our physician offices and the rest, in our warfare against that world outside of us, we have left ourselves denuded and vulnerable of life itself. It is really important for us to reorient quickly. And this is where I get excited about the opportunity to speak with all of you, because for as devastating as all of that news may feel, I believe we all showed up here on purpose. I believe we all showed up here at this moment, 7.8 billion people, animated by 7.8 billion souls, showed up right now. And I'm fascinated to see what we can co-create together when we come to realize that through our technological march, we came to right humanity out of nature. We have so isolated ourselves from nature in our march towards comfort and convenience that we have failed biologically as a species, and we are failing the planet for all of the other species that we now kill. By the simple reorientation into nature, we find the solutions for all of the devastation we have caused. And that solution is in the soil. We have been working with soils that date back 60 million years to find a microbiome diversity at that time, predating that previous extinction event with the dinosaurs, that spoke to an intelligence that we have actually never seen recover to its full effect on the planet since. An intelligence that was created by extraordinary microbiome diversity that created extraordinary nutrient density that allowed for ferns to grow to the size of 3-story buildings, that allowed a brontosaurus to grow 20 times larger than a horse with the same size head, chewing the same plants all day long. The nutrient density within the food allowed for massive biology to happen in the form of the dinosaurs. We had this nutrient density that created the vitality and the explosion of biodiversity that happened in that epoch of the dinosaurs. Everything from insects to amphibians and the rest were diversifying in extraordinary ways. And then it all collapsed. But something marvelous happened after that last great extinction. 87% of life is estimated to have disappeared over a very short period of years or decades. In the following millions of years, the Earth did not struggle back to some sort of previous normal. Instead, in the pressure of that extinction event, the microbiome and the macroorganisms, the dinosaurs, the reptiles, and the rest, left behind a massive signature of genetic information. And they did that in the form of viruses. Under stress, organisms will produce viruses for new genetic opportunity. Viruses, by their definition, are always seeking and providing a gain of function for not just a species, but actually all of the species on Earth. And so in these last 6 months, as we've shut down the global economy out of fear for a virus, we got very confused, and we failed to apply the last 30 years of scientific revolution to our public narrative on a virus that has circled this Earth. In the end, the viruses are an expression of stress and the solution to the stress. The viruses are always helping the organisms that would absorb those to move beyond the limitations of their current biology, to find new adaptive capacity and to create new biodiversity. The biodiversity that we have on Earth today, following the last great extinction, dwarf what we had then in regards to many species, the butterflies, for example. You look through these species and you realize that extinction event led to the opportunity for an explosion of diversification of skill sets and niches within the greater ecosystem. Why that gets me excited is that we have the opportunity as humans today, as we come to terms with the fact that we have killed the topsoils and the biodiversity of Earth, that if we stop that behavior, the genetic code left behind by the virome, this huge ecosystem of genetic information held by the viruses, is working already to update the biology of the planet to a biodiversity and a capacity for life and resilience that has perhaps never been seen on the planet before. This gets me very excited that we could change our behavior from one of bioengineering our food, bioengineering our weather systems, trying to control population through vaccine programs and the rest. And we can start to actually participate in a cooperative, co-creative process with the genomic intelligence and the communication intelligence of Earth itself. We could in fact see in the coming decades and centuries ahead some of the most resilient and most extraordinary human health that could be imagined. Imagine children that routinely live beyond 100 years, and not with the decay of the neurologic dysfunction that we see today in our geriatric population, with the neurologic conditions of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and ALS and MS and all of these other things, not to mention the cancer and the major depression and the isolation and loneliness. What if we learn not just to do human health, but human civilization as the microbiome would do it? What if we connected more intensely to our soil, not just to get more nutrient density out of our food, not just to get into the process of a regenerative agricultural system, but also to learn how to reimagine our information technology, our communication systems, our energy systems, our transportation systems, and in fact, our education systems to be one of biodiversification, communication between all members of society, a recognition of the value of every unique difference within us rather than holding those differences against one another, rather than dividing the human species. If we join the human species for one focus of diving back into the microbiome and the nature around us to find our unique niche as a species. Perhaps there was not some manifest destiny for us to take over and dominate the planet, but instead to find the humility and the character capable of stepping into nature instead of stepping on nature. It is my great hope that this day, as you guys dive into all of these speakers and this opportunity to reconsider your food system, your cooperative relationship to the soil systems through that food system, you start to imagine your capacity to change the world. It is a great honor to be with you. It's a great honor to be human in this moment. I am so grateful every day to see the tumultuous events happening around us, because it means the old paradigm is about to disappear. And it's time to birth a new normal. It's time to meet one another on a new plane and change the world for a future that we would want for our children. Thank you for your time.
I'm not a very hopeful person. I'm an active person. I feel like we're part of the solution and not the problem. And, you know, scientists have warned us that it looks pretty grim if we don't do anything.
There's a new certification that's out in the world called the Regenerative Organic Certification, and Patagonia has been piloting this for the past 2 years.
Regenerative organic agriculture takes the best parts of organic agriculture and it builds on it and says, what's the best practices that we can use for soil health, for animal welfare, for labor, and for farmers? And it combines it into one standard, which has really been missing over the last 25 years.
We started with 150 farmers in India. They did it all naturally and they had complete success.
पहले हमारे परदादा भी ऐसे ही खेती करते थे। जब से हम आरओसी करने लगे हैं तो उत्पादन भी थोड़ा कपास के अंदर मिश्रित खेती, मतलब अंदर सोयाबीन, मूंगफली, मूंग, उड़द सभी चीजें लगाते थोड़ा-थोड़ा।
The best part, I think, about regenerative organic is that the most efficient farm is about 1.5 acres. 2 people can manage a farm of that size. The yield can be 6 to 8 times more than industrial agriculture. Every time it rains, water doesn't run off, drought resistant, and it keeps the weeds down. You can do one small step at a time. Using compost instead of liquid fertilizer, figuring out a good cover crop by not letting your land be fallow. That's the revolution that's happening around the world right now.
Agriculture can either be part of the solution or part of the problem. Making apparel has a very wide spectrum of impacts. We're using energy, we're using water, we're creating waste. We're trying to look at every part of our supply chain and how we can create positive change.
We build product to show that there is a different path forward.
Farmers can't just flip the switch without systems level change. We really need to support our farmers, whether that's just in your everyday purchases or whether that's by advocating for policy. If we all work together, we can get there.
When one buys clothing made out of regenerative organic cotton, it's really a commitment to this test around agriculture.
You know, every time we sit down to eat, we're making a series of votes for a certain kind of world. We get to do it 3 times a day. And that's a great power that the consumer has.
At first glance, you may associate the brand Patagonia as an outdoor clothing company, which still rings true. However, in recent years, Patagonia Provisions was created as a way to broaden Patagonia's environmental mission by partnering with forward-thinking farmers, ranchers, and fishermen, and offers a variety of regeneratively sourced organic food. Under the leadership of Brigitte Cameron, Patagonia Provisions has introduced a varied line of mission-based food products intended to address critical environmental issues while establishing a model to help restore the food chain. In 2016, Brigitte produced Unbroken Ground, an award-winning documentary detailing the critical role food plays in solving the environmental crisis. Then in 2018, she worked as part of a larger Patagonia effort to establish the Regenerative Organic Alliance. ROA is a new high-bar organic certification that includes optimizing soil health to sequester more carbon and values animals and workers' welfare. Under Brigitte's direction, Patagonia Provisions has become a recognized leader in the organic food movement. Please welcome Ms. Brigitte Cameron as she gives us an inside look and understanding of how Patagonia Provisions makes an impact on the food industry and their contribution to promoting innovative, driving change, and creating diversity in a competitive market.
Hey everybody, it's really great to be here. I'm Brigitte Cameron and I am the head of Patagonia Provisions. Most of you know Patagonia as a clothing company, and some might also understand that Patagonia is really an environmental company focused on rethinking the way business operates in many areas beyond this. We have spent many years working in agriculture by building and developing supply chains for organic cotton, ulex, wool, hemp, and because of this deep dive into agriculture, we understand that agriculture as it relates to food is one of the biggest contributors to climate health. So we had to take action, and we built Patagonia Provisions. We did this to help transform the way we feed the world and to live up to our mission statement that we are in business to save our home planet. There is great opportunity and an urgent need for positive change in the food industry. And our approach to food is to help evolve the food industry into climate action through healthy soil and respect for the ocean ecosystems, and to focus on creating delicious and nutritious food along the way. The conventional food industry is poisoning our planet and our bodies, and all the while utilizing only 0.005% of all the edible plant species that this planet has to offer. Industrial agriculture is decimating the soil, reducing biodiversity that keeps nature in balance, and pumping carbon emissions into the atmosphere at runaway rates, which is contributing significantly to global warming. But healthy soil stores carbon dioxide. It's one of the best weapons we have against climate change. There is enough science out there now proving that it is entirely possible to make enough food to feed the world in a way that actually helps address climate change by eliminating our overdependence on chemicals and ensuring our soil remains healthy with regenerative organic practices. We can suck more carbon out of the air by doing this, by applying these practices, all the while making delicious food. And we can produce more food in the long run than destructive chemical ag. So to make that vision a reality, we partner with farmers and fisheries and ranchers who are all committed to changing the food industry. They're doing this by prioritizing the long-term health of the planet. In partnership with these producers, we develop food products that are made with your health and the planet's health in mind. Everything we make has a deep reason for being. Our buffalo jerky is about restoring the Great Plains, making sure that we help rebuild the prairie ecosystem. Our wild salmon and tinfish are about rethinking how and what we take out of the ocean in a way that restores this important ecosystem and ensures that we have wild and abundant species in the future. And our grain, vegetable, and fruit products are all about the importance of applying regenerative organic practices. When these practices are applied, we can restore soil, because soil at its highest eco-function can pull down carbon, provide higher nutrient content, allow for continuous productivity with higher yields, and help provide the best environment for pollinators who are responsible for 1/3 of our food supply. In turn, our actions support like-minded farmers, fishers, and ranchers, and sustainable small businesses, while also addressing the climate and environmental crisis. Provisions is working with small farmers creating market pull for ingredients and crops grown with regenerative practices like mango or kernza and breadfruit. Our business model is to invest in building the infrastructure and the supply chains to keep underutilized ingredients in our food system for the long run, or to bring new game-changing crops to market. Like our approach with kernza, a new perennial grain developed by the Rodale Institute that we use to make our delicious beer. 4 years ago, we began to create a market for this crop that didn't exist in the commercial level. So by introducing the very first commercially viable product made with kernza, our longroot ale and our longroot wit, we brought market to this. And we are now scaling this system. Another example of our work in building supply chains is reintroducing breadfruit, a nearly lost crop that happens to grow best in a regenerative organic agroforest environment. In doing this, we funded the creation of an agroforestry demonstration area at the Breadfruit Institute at Hawaii's National Tropical Botanical Gardens. This program teaches farmers in equatorial regions where breadfruit grows best a better way to farm by incorporating agroforestry and multi-cropping, which provides food security and new paths for economic stimulation in these communities, instead of growing conventional monocropping crops like pesticide-dependent sugarcane and pineapple. So by investing in breadfruit, we are helping to create market pull for this important crop, and with a great benefit to the communities involved and the environment. In addition to these examples, we have launched one of the very first regenerative organic certified products, our chili mango, working with farmers and communities in Nicaragua. Our work around regenerative organic certified has been in partnership with the Rodale Institute, Dr. Bronner's, and others committed to this exciting movement. By establishing standards and certifications around regenerative organic agriculture, which restores natural habitats, improves soil health, and considers animal well-being and social fairness, we are championing a new and improved way of producing food. When it comes to the production of food, we cannot continue with business as usual. We need to seek out ways to partner with food producers, big and small, to help them improve their production methods so that the health of our bodies and planet and our future generations are protected. If we're going to tackle climate change and protect our vanishing topsoil and water supplies, we need a paradigm shift in the food industry. It is imperative we follow the new and emerging science around these topics and use science as our compass. It's going to take a revolution, starting from the ground up, literally, to make this happen. And we have to commit to growing food regeneratively and organically. At Patagonia Provisions, we've expanded our business model and e-commerce platform to be an aggregate marketplace where consumers can find RO products and those moving in that direction, because we believe in collective action and we can't do this alone. This needs to be a movement of people and businesses and farmers all coming together. So what does the future look like? We will continue to grow our marketplace and add more delicious products with this mission as a guide. We will also continue to grow our community of farmers and ranchers and fisheries to extend the universe of regenerative organic producers. Lastly, Patagonia Provisions will continue pursuing partnerships with major food producers to help them embrace restorative organic practices and become positive contributors to the food industry and necessary ecosystem focus. Ultimately, we need to collectively build businesses based on incorporating solutions to the problems we face today, using science with a deep consideration of how our planet functions. Not all science should be acted upon, but credible science that proves a true understanding of how our planet works and how we can regenerate and restore it can be the base from which we can forge new paths, inspire new businesses, and build support systems for these discoveries and take action. This is where you all come in, to take action. Coming together is transformational. That's why we built Patagonia Provisions. We're bringing together a solutions-based and hopeful mindset to change the world. Together, we're setting a bigger table by building a bigger marketplace, a community full of engaged folks in this mission all together, a powerful alternative to industrial agriculture, and a path to restore and regenerate our home planet. So only together can we tackle this food crisis and change the food industry into a solution to climate change. As our founder, Yvonne Chouinard, says in our film Unbroken Ground, all these people moving in the same direction, you can't believe what we can accomplish. Now more than ever, we all need hope. There is no time like the present to take action. Thank you so much for listening.
Welcome to our final panel of the day. We will be discussing agrobiodiversity as a driving force for competitiveness and business development. I'm really excited to announce our dynamic panel of experts joining us. First up, I have Dorothy Shaver. She is a registered dietitian working in food sustainability with the unique experience and passion for driving mass behavior change for positive health and environmental outcomes. Over the past 15 years, she has worked across media, retail, healthcare, the fitness industry, championing food choices to enable personal and planetary health. Her most recent piece of work is the Future 50 Foods Report, which is a collaborative thought leadership report in which food systems issues are outlined and nutrient-dense foods that promote agrobiodiversity and reduce the negative environmental impact of food are identified. Welcome, Dorothy.
Thank you.
And next we have Krista Essig. She is the Global Sustainability Initiatives Manager with Bon Appetit at Google. Krista developed and led the Global Farm to Table program at Food at Google. And prior to that, she worked with the CDC as a public health analyst, as well as the Prevention Institute, and contributing to the EPA. Krista has been instrumental in developing programming across the board aimed at developing positive policies and practices related to our food and health systems. Welcome you, Krista. Next, we have Robin Ann Anderson, or should I say Robin? I apologize. Robin Anderson. Yes, she is an international expert in agriculture and food policies, working with a broad range of clients from farmers to food processors, research institutions to governance. Robin often represents organizations at the United Nations, bringing the voice of agriculture in multi-governmental processes. She coordinates private sector mechanism representing agribusinesses at the UN Committee and World Food Security. Also in 2017, she became the youngest person inducted into the Canadian Agriculture Hall of Fame. Welcome, Robin. And then we have Douglas Gayton. Douglas is a taxonomist, filmmaker, photographer, and writer specializing in impact storytelling in food and water. He has written and directed film series for PBS and HBO and Condé Nast. His stories and iconic photography about agriculture and food systems have appeared in thousands of pop-up art shows, a concept pioneered by the Lexicon. Douglas is the author of Slow, Life in a Tuscan Town, and Local, the new face of food and farming in America. His photographs are held in museums and private collections all around the world. And Douglas has co-founded the Lexicon of Sustainability with Laura Howard Gayton in 2011. Welcome, Douglas. We're happy to have you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. So I want to start with what is the role of agribusiness in driving structural change in the food systems? Just trying to give everybody a sense of agribusiness as we start this conversation. Krista, I know that Google is one of the most important global players in technology. So what is their vision relating to agribusiness?
So I work for Compass Group, and Google is one of our clients. And we have been working on bringing agrobiodiversity into our programs, and it's really important to us in terms of how it affects both people and the planet. And so we're meeting a lot of sustainability goals. It's really a win-win situation, and also is delicious and nutritious for our clients as well. And, you know, when it comes to working with farmers and the food system and suppliers, we understand in order to bring some new and different kinds of crops into our menus and our recipes, we have to collaborate across, many of the people who are on this panel today. I've worked with all of them to try to look at different ingredients and find suppliers that we can bring into our system, a larger food service. So.
And I like the word you use, delicious. That really rang a bell with me. And I know that, Dorothy, you were part of the Future 50 Foods initiative. I'm just wondering how were they chosen? Was it, I'm sure it was beyond just the deliciousness, but I'm sure that played a big factor in terms of deciding what foods went on that list.
Yeah, absolutely. So Knorr is Unilever's largest food brand, and together with WWF, we created the Future 50 Foods. So it starts by outlining the food system issues and then identifies 50 of the many foods that we should be eating more of. And the intention of the report is actually to create an exemplary list of foods that can do a lot of different things, help mitigate climate change. They can grow on their own without having lots of fertilizers or pesticides. Some of them can grow without water. Some can grow underwater, some can really grow in all different types of climates, and some can grow in really, really extreme temperatures. So the intention of it is to really identify 50 different foods that are high in nutrient value, that have a lower environmental impact, so emit less greenhouse gas emissions, and also have a higher yield, and also are available and accessible all over the world. So it's a global list, and the intention was actually to have some from all over the world to really show all of the solutions that food can provide, all the way from decreasing waste to really helping increase biodiversity on the flip side, and also from the economic impact of opening supply chains across the world. So that's the intention of Future 50 Foods. There's many foods on there that we all probably eat, kale and spinach and quinoa, and others that some of us probably haven't heard of, especially in this part of the world, where I'm sitting today, of course, in Europe, and also in the United States, where a lot of us are from and in. Things like marama beans and bambara groundnuts and fonio may not be as well known, although if you heard Pierre Thiam, you probably know about fonio now. So that's the intention of the Future 50 Foods. The methodology to choose them is actually based on the UN FAO definition of sustainable diets.
Okay. That was going to be my next question, which was why were these crops actually chosen for this program? And I think, Krista, at Compass, you have worked with this food list as well?
Yeah, definitely. It's been super helpful and informative into helping us develop and look at what ingredients we want to include in our recipes and on our menus all over the world. So we are a global program and want to look at what's available and where there's opportunities in different parts of the world. That can be a challenge as well as finding things that are available. So we need to continue to work on building supply chains and finding supply chains collectively with others who also want to purchase these ingredients. So we need to all create the demand together.
Exactly. And in thinking about that, Robin, what is the importance of making biodiversity accessible to all? How are companies and other ecosystems working together, in your view, to broaden that goal?
Well, I think the key is that we often talk about agricultural sustainability, as Dorothy mentioned, like it's unrelated to nutritional outcomes or delicious outcomes, as Chris just said. So the reality is what's good on a farm is good diversity. And the more you're crop rotating, the more you're mixing agroforestry with your cropping and your livestock techniques, the better the outcomes. We've talked about that a lot earlier today. And then if you are able to create a pull-through to companies like Unilever or Compass and Google, you have an opportunity to get to market with those products, and you're beginning to think about how you link that supply chain to consumer demand. And definitely one of the unique things in this space is you need really diverse solutions to drive diversity, because some of those bigger products, those bigger companies need quite a robust supply chain. So you may need some mid-level players engaged in supplying Fonio, like Chef Pierre, or other great companies that are beginning to help build up that supply chain. But it's also a space where you see lots of great SMEs working. And I think the biggest thing is we need the farm production to support that supply chain, and we need that supply chain to be patient enough to let that production come on stream. And that's often the missing art.
So biodiversity, sometimes for some people can be an unknown concept. For some who might know about it, they have different views. So how important do you think ensuring an alignment in the ideas of different stakeholders and when people talk about food? So Douglas, how has Lexicon been working in this direction to kind of ensure the alignment? We talk about the supply chain and being transparent. What steps has Lexicon taken to go in this direction?
Well, we've done a number of initiatives. We began by getting together with Crop Trust, who is the creator of Food Forever, with Biodiversity International, with CIAT, ICRISAT, about a dozen international agencies to identify what is agrobiodiversity and what are examples of success. And so we worked for about a year with them. They identified 25 crops that when they were reintroduced in communities around the world, they had all kinds of really amazing impacts for people on the ground. They got them out of this vicious cycle of growing commodity crops for export, got them back into growing crops that were indigenous, that were providing much better results in terms of nutrients, creating mechanisms for value-added products, triggering economic revivals that kept money in communities. So there's so many things connected to agrobiodiversity that are just beyond not eating corn, rice, or wheat. It's really a driver that sustained traditional cultures for millennia that we discarded at the end of the 20th century. So with that group, we put together what those 25 were, and then we began documenting those stories, which you can see at the lexicon.org. From that, we created an accelerator that we have been running with many of the people that you have had today, everybody from Chef Pierre to Erik Oberholtzer to Danny Nierenberg to Robin to Krista are all in this accelerator. And the accelerator has been very focused on one thing, which is that people might talk about agrobiodiversity, but often they have no idea as a company that they're actually supporting it because their supply chains are totally blind. So one of the first things that our accelerator figured out was if you have a blind supply chain, how can you actually support the things you're talking about? So our accelerator, which you can see at greenbrownblue.com, really looks at how do you make a more transparent supply chain? And how can a food company actually even know how to ask the right questions from their suppliers so they can support the food system that they want to see?
Thank you for that, Douglas. We have some viewer questions coming in, which is really great. Our first one is from Alejandro from Lima, Peru. How can we build an incentive platform for big agricultural firms to encourage them to invest in operation who prioritize biodiversity? Can the financial sector play a role?
That's a great
Robin,
question.
I see.
Yes, definitely there is patience needed, and you can think of it in the scope of patient capital. But it's really the ability to be patient in the supply chain. And I know some people in the urban spice market, which is pretty biodiverse to begin with, who have really spent some time thinking about how to go into an area and encourage production, perhaps of very healthful spices that haven't had as much production, and they have to be willing to wait a few seasons to let people get settled in, sometimes in spices even years, because it's a longer production cycle. And that issue of patience has to come from a large organization, such as some on this call right now, or it might come from people who are willing to invest in a mid-tier player who can again be patient. But I think the challenge is often we either intervene at the farm level or we intervene at the purchaser level, and we do very little to make that whole supply chain connected. So financiers who are willing to intervene all along the supply chain, including the marketing and handling to get to those bigger markets, are really essential, and there are very few people who are thinking that way.
I might be a minority in this group, but I hope that we're not assuming that agrobiodiversity benefits from global companies supporting it. Sometimes agrobiodiversity is benefited by companies on the ground. Crops shouldn't just be grown to be exported. Sometimes greater agrobiodiversity, the true benefit of that is going to be the people in the countries where those crops are grown. That's the challenge, that's the tension. People often talk about the quinoa conundrum, this idea that quinoa was so successful when it was introduced in the global market that it actually depressed the economy and the growers' prices that they were getting in the country of its origin. So there's a constant tension between wanting to support greater agrobiodiversity and not wanting to do harm to the very people who need to benefit from it most.
Thank you for that point.
I can add a little point on the back of that as well. So that was something that we have to consider as we move forward with creating the demand of the Future 50 foods, understanding that the supply may be quite small, and then that could actually put many of the people in the places that grow these foods at risk, as Douglas rightly said. So what we've done is we've partnered with Grow Intelligence, who has a huge amount of data on supply and also has a lot of data on where food should be grown naturally, how much of that food can be grown, and also created kind of a risk factor to say we can only increase the demand by this much because that's how much supply we have. And if we go over that amount, we're actually putting the local people at risk as opposed to benefiting them. So we've been able to really kind of quantify that and be able to say, you know, when we're creating these products or when we're creating programs to create the demand for these lesser known foods, there is a way to really monitor it and be able to see, you know, based on the great data that Grow Intelligence has provided for us, to make sure that we're not harming those communities and to make sure that we're not going above that supply that's available. So that's really important to do. And that balance between supply and demand is absolutely crucial for us to create a really good food system moving forward for these foods that are lesser known and a wider variety of foods.
Yeah, I think that this is really important to all of us. And, you know, it's something that we've been very aware of trying to make sure that there's also a local supply chain and thinking about what the price point is for export versus local supply chains. It's definitely on top of all of our minds and thinking about as we're creating a demand and different kinds of value chains for these crops. So it's a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we have another question from a viewer, and we've been speaking a lot about crops and seeds throughout the panels and throughout our day. And this question is bringing livestock into the picture? And is there a role for livestock in the future of food? Many ecosystems rely heavily in livestock products in the US, but we often hear animal production is the main driver behind our broken ecosystems. Can this role change?
Well, I'll take a go at that one first and let the others join in. But I think the Rodale Institute was one of the first to really focus in on the importance of the classical vision of mixed farming or integrated approaches to farming. Because we can sit around and say it's all about the animals in the world that are driving GHG emissions, but the reality is us in cities, fossil fuels flying around the earth that are driving a lot of these issues. And if we extract the grasslands and the grazing spaces from our environment, we would deplete those soils very quickly if we were to begin cropping them intensively. They're generally grasslands, or sometimes we call them marginal lands, because they are well suited to grass production that has seasonality based on rain patterns, etc. So I think there's an important role for livestock and animals on this planet, wildlife as well as kept animals. And we need to keep in mind how to strike that balance more effectively. So I do think that agrobiodiversity actually includes livestock, and includes a diversity of livestock, because livestock breeds are under just as much pressure of consolidation and minimization as we see in seed cropping as well.
Thank you so much. Any other thoughts to add to Robin?
Well, I think that, animals have historically always played a really valuable role in terms of, as Robin pointed out, the ecosystem services they provide. Those really valuable ecosystem services, mostly on marginal land, again, as Robin pointed out, that couldn't be used for most agricultural production anyway, is valuable. It provides a valuable ecosystem service. I think what the person who wrote your question was really pointing to, do we need a global agricultural model where we're bringing animals together and concentrated animal feed operations where they provide no ecosystem service benefits of any kind? And that's the question that we all need to, is too much consolidation a good thing or a bad thing? Does it provide ecosystem service benefits or not?
Great point. Our next question is from Laura Hansen. How can we implement this in the heartland? There are corn and soybean farmers that want options, but that involves a cost. How can we ensure these farmers make this change?
I was filming in Nebraska last year, and a man took me through a field that was all millet. And I was really excited because, Dorothy, it might be one of your 50, yeah, of course, yeah. So, millets are really, amazing grain, right? And so I asked him, I was so excited, like here I am in the middle of Nebraska, he's growing millet. And you know what the millet was for? Bird seed, because nobody would buy it. And so it really gets down to, all these things get down to consumer awareness, which creates demand. Growers always say, if there's a market for it, we'll grow it. I remember another time walking through a field with this man, and I saw these metal tags on the ground. I asked him what it was, and he said, these are all peas. And I realized I had just heard of this term, pea protein isolate, which is an alternative protein, plant-based protein. And here was a man who was a guy that had traditionally grown corn for 40 years, now growing peas and diversifying his portfolio. Why? Because there was consumer demand, consumer awareness, which led to consumer demand.
Yes. And in speaking about the consumer demand, kind of bringing it back down to our own kitchens, what things can the industry do better to increase these demands for these products amongst your everyday consumer, someone like me?
Yes, I'll speak to that. So Of course, Nora is a mainstream brand. It's in over 90 countries, and it's purchased 2.7 billion times a year. So it's a huge mainstream brand. So industry and mainstream brands really need to use their reach, their impact, their scale, and their inspiration to really move people into this wider variety of foods. And the ways to do it is actually by using chefs and influencers to make these foods really, really cool. So in Nigeria, for example, we actually worked with the local rock star and influencer to cook different types of foods and really, really inspire people to make them. So really making these foods be mainstream, be cool, be something that we want to all eat. And that can be done through influencers and also through our chefs. We also, as an industry, have to work together with our retailers to get these foods on the shelves, to make them available. And, we also have a major role to play in making these foods cookable, in making them into products that are easy to cook up, that don't have, let's say, the outside shell on the grain, or don't have, different barriers that people are taken back from to cook them. And we also have a major role to play in the inspiration side. So educating, how they taste good, how we can get them out there, making sure that they're in the restaurants. So working together with great chefs, once people can go to more restaurants, of course, working together with Sodexo, which is what we've done to get these foods into different kitchens around the world. So making them really familiar, making them accessible, and making them affordable, and really making them cool and fun and delicious to eat. So that's really the major role that we have to play as a big brand. And we can't do it alone. We have to do it with partners, and we absolutely need to do it also together with our competitors and with smaller brands.
Yes. And Krista, I know your culinary team has worked with Future 50, Rediscover, and the crops really add a lot in a culinary sense with the taste, the profile. And can you highlight some of the foods in the list that you might want to single out because of their taste and potential to drive change in the food systems?
Oh, well, that's not fair to pick one or two or a couple. You can't do that.
Yeah, just give me a handful.
Our culinary team has done such an amazing work to help to bring this program to life, which we did at the beginning of the year for a couple of months before we weren't in intense food service anymore. But really, they were so excited to work with a variety of these new and different kinds of ingredients and get creative, be inspired by traditional ways of cooking some of these foods as well. So, I mean, we've integrated over 25 new ingredients in our program, ranging from teff to millet, that was described earlier. Buckwheat has been a big one, and I love cooking with buckwheat at home now. Actually, I've been baking with it. I can find it at your local co-op. I definitely encourage individuals to take action and start cooking with some of these new and delicious and nutritious ingredients. So, it's a host of opportunities and possibilities and flavor profiles to get to include.
Thank you so much for all of your expertise and all of your input. We're coming to the end of our time, which is so sad because I would love to hear more about all of these awesome new ingredients and crops coming up. Somebody who cooks a lot in her kitchen, this is very exciting and very encouraging. And I appreciate the work that each and every one of you are doing with your teams to help broaden our horizons in the food scope and help to safeguard all of our food seeds and all of the different practices, best practices being put into place. I also want to thank Food Forever, Pocono Organics, and Patagonia Provisions for organizing this incredible event and for allowing me to be a part of it. And I would like to thank all of the speakers today, all of the panelists that I've had the pleasure of working with today and learning from. I am truly inspired, as I'm sure our entire global audience is as well. And I'm looking forward to taking a more active role beyond my kitchen here. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their weekend. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sierra Martin, and I'm with the Crop Trust and Food Forever communications team. I find it really challenging to speak after the incredible leaders that you just heard before me. They were truly inspiring, and I feel really honored just to be included in this lineup at all. The speakers that you heard from today, they don't just talk the talk, but they're walking the walk. And I'm so glad that they were able to share just a small portion of the incredible work that they're doing with you this morning. None of the program that you just experienced would have been possible without the dedication and the support of the team at Pocono Organics. So I just want to start off by saying a big thank you to the whole Pocono Organics team. Also to Patagonia Provisions for supporting the creation of this event, as well as the Rodale Institute, the Cohere team, and our amazing team of dedicated staff at the Crop Trust, who have worked tirelessly to realize this event. And not least to our speakers, who have taken the time out of their busy schedules to be with you here today, and to our rock star MC, Dina, who you all know very well by now. But I think it's worth repeating, again, a big thank you to Ashley Walsh and her team for making this a reality. I met Ashley on this very same day 2 years ago in New York City at our first Food Forever experience at Google. I remember having this moment where, we had about 200 people ready to come in and, slowly trickling in. And I was absolutely terrified. Was this going to work? This idea of a Food Forever experience and a way to make crop diversity more tangible to people through communication and chefs, and ultimately the plate of food, it was just an idea at that point. We had never done something like this before, and so we were really unsure if it would reach people or not. What we did know was that not many people knew about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or that Goal 2 was to end hunger by 2030. And we were pretty positive that even if people knew about that, even fewer people knew about Target 2.5 under Goal 2, which calls on the global community to safeguard crop and livestock diversity as one stepping stone to ending hunger and reaching the larger goal by 2030. I think it's safe to say that we can all agree that ending hunger is a good thing. Making our foods more nutritious, more resilient in the face of climate change, that's not something to be overlooked. And I think we all understand the gravity and the importance of this. But how many people actually understand what it means and how the loss of agrobiodiversity affects what we eat every single day? As Simran Sethi put it in her book, Bread, Wine, and Chocolate, The Slow Loss of Foods We Love, people are busy, and there's a lot competing for our attention. We're more attentive to those things that have a direct influence on our daily life. So if we can make this story individual, it's more likely to resonate and to stick. The idea of the Food Forever experience was to do just that. We said, okay, now let's stop talking about the diversity of our foods, but show people through fun communications tools like these painted mannequins that you see beside me, which show on one side what our normal diets look like, kind of gray and yellow, and what it could look like if we started bringing more diversity into our diets. We said, let people taste it through the amazing craft of chefs who rely on the diversity of our foods for their work. Since September 25th in 2018, we've had 10 experiences in 8 countries. We've heard directly from indigenous communities like the Parque de la Papa in Peru, who safeguard over 4,000 different varieties of potato, to the World Economic Forum in Davos, to London during the holiday season, where we highlighted our personal and cultural connections to food, and even to our last experience in Abu Dhabi, where we heard directly from youth who are exploring paths to improve our food systems. We've literally reached thousands of people, from top chefs to teachers to entrepreneurs to the president of Peru. But what has been one of the biggest successes of this entire campaign, in my personal opinion, is that we're here right now. And I'm speaking with you all at this very moment, the Food Forever Experience Pocono. See, I don't know if we reached everybody in the room at the Food Forever Experience New York, but I can tell you with confidence that we reached one person, Ashley Walsh, who was inspired enough to build a Food Forever garden, to reach out to genebanks and the USDA and Seed Savers Exchange and Rose 7, and start working with this diversity, growing it, experimenting with it, cooking with new varieties, and ultimately bringing this message to all of you today through hosting this event. That one connection made a difference. As a communicator, I've had some existential conversations about the value of communications. I struggled because I didn't want to just write blogs that would never amount to any real impact. I wanted to be out there doing real work, not just talking about it. I wanted to make a difference. But through this event, I really have seen that awareness raising can lead, of course not in all cases, but in many, to concrete positive action, which makes a tangible impact. And that's what I'd like to leave you all with today. At Food Forever, we've been pretty good about raising awareness. But awareness means nothing if it isn't changing our behavior. For Ashley, it did, and I encourage everyone still listening to internalize what you heard today. Reach out to the speakers and their organizations. Get involved in whatever little piece of this work that spoke to you the most. Because every single day that we don't act, we're losing valuable resources that underpin our entire food systems. I recently learned of the Mayan definition of the human being, which they called vibrant being. The thinking being that we're all part of the same universal vibration. There's this poem by playwright Luis Valdez in Lakesh that says, "You are my other me." Part of it reads, "If I do harm to you, I do harm to myself. If I love and respect you, I love and respect myself." This really resonated with me, and it's meaningful not only in our relationships to one another, but also with our environment, our food systems, and the decisions that we take every single day in what to grow, what to eat, and where we choose to direct our support. We can't do this alone, and our actions are connected. At the very beginning of our day-to-day, Ashley said, "We is greater than me, and we can change the world together." Well, I say let's go do it. Thank you so much for your time and your attention, and have a great rest of your afternoon. Thank you, and be well.